Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. You saw the intro, you know exactly what we're talking about. Hopefully, you followed us on this journey through our reviews of The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers. And of course, all good things have to come to an end, sadly. And we are here to talk about The Return of the King,
That's it.
concluding the
One
greatest
last
trilogy ever.
journey.
Yes, yes, one last time. Maybe until next year. We're having a
Oh yeah,
discussion.
we
We'll
can
cross
see.
that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, this is Return of the King. We come to it at last. The greatest review of our time. I've wanted to do that for ages, and I finally get the chance to do it now. Once again, Harry, you're jumping on with me here. You've joined me on this quest, reviewing all these films.
Yeah,
It's been a long time coming. It's great to have you back
it
again.
has. Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. Really enjoyed coming back and getting to talk about some of my favorite films. So yeah, really, the pleasure is all mine. Not many people will let me talk to them for about 4 hours now about Lord of the Rings. So yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty
I thought
good.
you were just going to make that really sad then, like not many people want to talk to me.
Oh yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh, that's
that too. You know, I'm just playing for the sympathy.
But no, we want to hear from you guys as well about Lord of the Rings. I mean, this has been great. So let us know what you think of Lord of the Rings, specifically Return of the King. But it's, you know, it is like a package deal when you talk about Lord of the Rings, isn't it? All three films you kind of view as one story. So let's just talk Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, everything in between. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff. And of course, if you want to follow us on social medias, they're going across the bottom of the screen right now. That's Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterbox.com/cinema savvy. That is all the preamble done. Let's talk some Return of the King. Now, the last one that we did was 2.5 hours. This is the big finale. I don't know how long we'll be talking on this.
Yeah, this again,
yeah.
we've said already. This could be like our smallest review because it's neither of our favorite films of the trilogy, or it could be absolutely massive because we're going to get into sort of the impact of the trilogy as a whole. So really, it could go either way. I'm excited to find out.
Oh God, I've got to upload it. Well, this is pre-recorded right now, so God help me, God help my bandwidth. But yeah, before we sort of like dive into the film properly, and we're going to split it in the same way, probably again talking about all the individual characters. But first memories of this film. I know that you mentioned you didn't see them at the cinema, but do you think of like any hype around this film? Do you remember any fond memories about it, or?
I mean, again, no to me because again, like you said, I viewed this trilogy mostly as one continuous whole. So I never really viewed the parts as they came out. So I never had that experience of sort of hype building up to the next installment. It was already out and finished by the time I ever got around to watching them. So it was a case of just I was excited. There was a lot of hype for me the next day to watch the third Lord of the Rings film, but beyond that, no, it was predominantly just a case of okay, here we go again. Let's settle in for it. Like it was already established that these films were brilliant at the time, so there was no concerns, no niggles, or anything. Everyone was like, "Yep, nope, perfect, cool, well done, Peter Jackson, excellent trilogy, great stuff, mate."
Give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah. So, what about yourself, though? Because obviously you saw the cinema, so I imagine for you it would have been a much different experience.
Yeah, I remember very vividly. It was opening night. I went to see this. So my best mate, his birthday conveniently is on December 17th. So a wonderful coincidence. The fun aside, we were both massive Lord of the Rings fans. We had the action figures and everything. I think certainly by Two Towers. I mean, it was around with Fellowship certainly, but I think Two Towers, that 1 year difference was like massive in our sort of like maturity level at the time, in understanding and sort of digesting the films and our attention spans and everything like that. But I certainly think the merchandising ramped up a lot more with Two Towers. New Line Cinema probably realized what a good thing they had going, and thankfully for all of us, or maybe not thankfully for my wallet, they really pushed the merchandise out, right? So I mean, that was big by Return of the King. We were massive Lord of the Rings fans at the time. We were on board, we were hyped. It was the finale, and yeah, we were there opening night. Went to Odeon Cinema, packed audience. I even remember sort of like where we were situated in the auditorium. We were almost back row. We don't think we were back row. We were like one in front, maybe towards the right hand side. I remember the positioning so vividly. We went with his dad, who took us there. And he was asleep the whole thing. He was like snoring. He was gone. He got a good 3-hour nap that night. It was
taste. Yeah, 3 hours. Yeah, honestly.
And yeah, so my opinions at the time, I obviously really liked the film, but I knew that I didn't like it as much as Two Towers, even like on opening night. It's a film that definitely grew on me a lot more. Not to say I hated the film or I was disappointed by it or anything like that, but I think a big thing was, and we'll talk about this when we get into the characters, is that in Two Towers, the Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli story was my favorite. It was epic.
Stunning.
And don't get me wrong, there are some good moments in Return of the King, but we're talking about the theatrical edition here, and they weren't in it as much. You know, they go off to the Paths of the Dead, which is fine, but it's not as cool or interesting as the stuff in Two Towers. And then they're out of the movie for
Yeah.
a considerable portion. And I was like, I needed more Aragorn. It didn't feel the same. So maybe I latched onto that, but I do remember the energy. I remember, you know, when Frodo and Sam are scaling Mount Doom at the end, and the film's going on, but it's a good kind of going on. You feel
Yeah.
like, oh, you know, you feel wearied almost alongside
Well,
Frodo wanting to
it's
get there.
famously a film with like 7 endings. Like every time it
Yeah,
ends, there's another ending that comes after it. So like
yeah,
the film ends really with the destruction of the ring. Let's say if it ends there, there's still like another 30 minutes of film left after that of just
mhm,
continuous endings. So I know that when I watched it as a child, that was something I really didn't care for. I was
yeah,
like, okay, we get it. They did the thing. All right, let's move along. But now obviously having almost grown up again with those characters, it's now a lot more emotional for me having watching them say these goodbyes and all the rest of it. So I feel like it's definitely something that grows on you with more with maturity. I think, like I've said before, and like we said last time, Two Towers is all about that spectacle. Like Helm's
mhm,
Deep is just cool. There is no getting around it. It's fantastic. I love that sequence, and the whole of the film has that same sort of like 14-year-old boy kind of appeal. Whereas a
mhm,
lot of the
yeah,
sort of themes were a lot more mature in Return of the King. You had obviously things with like sacrifice with Denethor and Faramir, and the Hobbits take really center stage with Sam and Frodo's story being, in my opinion, by far the most compelling of all the stories.
mhm,
Um, and as a child, that's just not as interesting. It's not as
mhm.
cool as watching Legolas surf down a staircase or
He gets to
Aragorn
climb an
chop a
Oliphant
guy
in
in
this
half.
one,
He
though.
does, yeah. No, don't get me wrong, but yeah, no, the three hunters certainly take a back seat, which I think
Mhm,
definitely sort of lends itself to that. Which almost in recent viewings is the more interesting part because you get to see this more introspective sort of version of the Fellowship and all that side of things. But I can certainly see why both yourself and I on
mhm.
opening night didn't find it quite as compelling.
Yeah, and I think maybe, you know, as you get older, maybe you get more emotional. Maybe you shut yourself off emotionally. But I remember at the time, I didn't quite have the emotional resonance as I do now watching the films,
Yeah,
for example. You know, I was, I think, 10 going on 11, maybe, at the time. So, you know, I was the ripe age for it, certainly. But, you know, having that impact now and the meaning behind the story and what it means for the characters and like Frodo's emotional state and being
yeah.
disconnected from I didn't pick up on that at like the
No,
age of
not
10, you
not
know.
at all. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel so bad for Frodo now, but like for how I treated him myself, like when I was like, "Come on, Frodo, pull yourself together, mate. It's not that hard. You just got a ring, do your job." Obviously, not realizing like the intense psychological trauma that
Mm,
he basically endured for a full year and
mm,
all the rest of it. Like, I think a lot of that subtlety and nuance, which I'm really glad it was subtle and nuanced,
mm,
is lost on younger audiences. And I think things the struggle of Sam and Frodo and Gollum's betrayal, or even the Gandalf and Pippin's story, which I think's absolutely enthralling. I love everything to do with Gondor and the sort of much more, I don't know, again, nuanced take on men and corruption, all the rest of it than Rohan was, which is very much a black and white. Rohan are the good guys
mm,
kind of view in Two Towers. I think there's a lot more shades of grey present in Return of the King, and that's certainly something that I grow to appreciate more with each rewatching of it.
mm. Yeah, definitely the parallels between I think this you even see this more so in the books, which is a given, you know, there's a lot more in the books,
Of
but
course, yeah.
the parallels between King Theoden and Denethor
Yeah,
certainly, and how they're very similar characters, but it's how they go about, you know, one pulls himself out of that hopelessness and one kind of throws himself into it and
self
becomes
into it. Yeah,
consumed by it, which I thought was really great. But you talked about the endings, and I remember opening night. You know that initial Fade to Black. I'm glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee, here at the end of all things, Fade to Black, and everyone was like, "Are we done?" Like,
no,
and
no.
then you get like the music continues, and it feels like it's, and then you know it fades back in, and you get the Eagles. You know, you get the stuff in the bed. I think it fades out again, and
Yeah,
I distinctly remember people standing up out of their seats ready to leave, and then having to like sit back down, and then stand up like and sit back down. That happened about 3 or 4 times, which was fantastic. Um, I never really had a problem with the endings back then. I was just kind of like, give me more. I don't want it
sure.
to end. I think even Peter Jackson himself, you know, will probably talk a little bit about the behind the scenes stuff as well, but one of the most emotional bits of the behind the scenes is Frodo's last day on set, or Elijah.
Yeah.
I call them their characters' names. Elijah Wood's last day on set, and it's where it's the There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins, The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. You finished it, not quite. There's room for a little more.
Yeah.
That I think that was his final scene, and it's Peter Jackson just keep rolling the cameras like, no, let's go for another take, let's go for another take. And they just did take after take after take because he didn't want to stop. That was
Yeah.
going to be it. And I kind of had that sense as a viewer as well. I was like, I love this world, just let it keep going.
Yeah.
I think it on subsequent rewatchings at the cinema, because I think I went to see this probably about 3 or 4 times at the cinema, I think in total. When they destroy the ring and you've already seen the film, you know what's to come, you become kind of more conscious of the time and go, okay, the plot's over, but there's another like 30 to 40 minutes of film left right now, which is fine. And yeah, I think that the endings are absolutely justified. I get people's criticisms with it, but I think that, and they cut out one of the biggest endings from the book, the Scouring of the Shire, right?
No.
Like, could you imagine if they'd have adapted that as well? I mean,
that's one of my things actually. I think maybe talk about it a bit later. I always wonder what the reaction was of book only people who went into sort of or people that read the books go into like they're looking at all these fools thinking the film's over, like, haha, yeah, wait till you see what happens with Saruman, and it just doesn't happen. I imagine, like, if I was a viewer, I would have been left so utterly baffled by that, especially because in the theatrical cut, there is no resolution to Saruman's story. He's just kind of chilling in Isengard. So obviously, as a book reader, you'd go in there expecting the Scouring of the Shire, and don't get it. So yeah, I
and
always
you've
thought that
seen
was
glimpses as well in Fellowship of the Ring and the Mirror of Galadriel, perhaps, that it could allude to that. I guess that could be sort of like a jumping off point, maybe, because we might bring, well, book comparisons are probably going to come up in this discussion.
Doubtlessly, yeah.
Are you glad that they didn't adapt the Scouring of the Shire fully? Do you think that would have been too much for the film? Someone I know mentioned who loves Lord of the Rings says that the Scouring of the Shire is like a hat on top of a hat. It's like fantastic. You're done. It's like, oh no, there's a little bit more, and it does feel like an extra climax. Like the tension's over with Sauron. It dips back down, and then it ramps back up again with Saruman.
I mean, it's hard to say because I think it's a really interesting aspect. I like the fact that you get to see the hobbits being like true heroes, just of themselves, without any of these famous kings of men and wizards and whatever to back them up. Like, it's a case of the hobbits now must truly answer the call to adventure, and they must be the heroes. But I think the story already sort of tells that. Like, it's them; they're the ones who throw it into the volcano. They're the ones who save the world. So I don't think it's necessary. I understand why Tolkien did it. And I think it's probably one of the more morally grey aspects of the series, because a lot of Lord of the Rings is very black and white. It's one of my biggest criticisms with it. It's also one of the reasons I love it the most, or as much as I do, rather. But I think, like, obviously the Scam of the Shire is like, haha, you won, but you didn't really, because your home's destroyed. Suck on that, losers. And it feels very... It's like, all right, I get you trying to show that, like, war affects even the people who aren't involved in it and all those allergies. And obviously it all ties back to Tolkien's experiences in World War II and the rest of it. But, like, it does just feel very unnecessary. And I like the movie ending. It's nice and comforting to watch the four of them ride into the Shire and all tip their hats at as they go through. And it's just that's much more pleasant to me. And I kind of like the more... the implication that the Shire doesn't care. Like, I actually think that's more interesting a story than them coming back and, like, the Shire is forced to recognize them as heroes because they liberate them or whatever. I think the fact that the Shire has just been plodding along without them. They probably talk about those weird Black Riders from a few months ago. What was that all about? And that's probably about it. They have no idea what else is going on, and they're just having a nice, relaxed time. These four other hobbits come back, and they're now wealthy and like, yeah, right, whatever. Classic Bilbo things, good old Baggins is, and just sort of move on. And I like that aspect of it more. I think it speaks more to what the Shire is all about than these victims of war, which I think is a more interesting interpretation.
Yeah, I love both endings, the book ending with the Scouring of the Shire and the one that removes it in the film. And this is where, chief among them, having read the books numerous times now, thankfully, and seeing lots of these changes, there are aspects about the films that I greatly prefer to the book. There are aspects that are obviously much more developed and much more appealing than the books. And this is where a change like this is where, in my mind, I distinctly have to divide the two now.
Sure.
You know, and I love that ending in the book. I know its place, I know its purpose, I know why it's there. You know, seeing that hero's journey of these four hobbits, sort of like leading factions of hobbits, you know,
Yeah.
leading them into battle. Lobelia Sackville Baggins gets an amazing redemption in the book as
Yeah.
well, the character development there. And I love Saruman's sort of demise in the book and how it's described in that, you know, he is an angel essentially, you know, with the West, and his spirit almost tries to flee into the West, and then like a breeze brushes it away, saying
Yeah.
like, "Nah, you're not coming into the West," and he just disintegrates into nothing. I love the symbolism of that, and then obviously
Yeah.
tying it into the greater lore. But it wouldn't have worked in the film because, you know, the extended cut of the film is already 4 hours and 8 minutes, and you
Yeah.
would have easily been adding another 30 to 40 minutes on to do the Scouring of the Shire
Oh, yeah.
justice. So, um, and yeah, and this is where I do really appreciate the film ending as well, because I actually think that the film ending is probably truer than, you know, to real life circumstances, if you are going to tie it into sort of like World War I and everything, where people came home and people were just blissfully unaware and
Yeah.
kind of ignorant. They couldn't connect with the people that had gone to war because they hadn't experienced the horrors. You know, they might have read into the propaganda or the idyllic image of it. And, you know, people coming home would have been emotionally disconnected. They wouldn't have been able to fit in, and it would have been that complete, you know, post-traumatic stress and, you
Yeah.
know, everything like
Absolutely.
that coming back home. So one of my favorite bits in the film, and there's no dialogue, and it's where all four of them are in the Green Dragon, and without any dialogue, you know everything they're thinking and everything that's going on in their head, and they're looking at around at this world that hasn't changed, and they all just kind of shrug their shoulders and, you know, cheers
Yeah,
in
and
the
they
middle.
realize
I
that
love that.
they will never
Absolutely love
be the
that.
same for what they've
Yeah,
experienced and all the rest of it. And again, this
they're
is reflected
grateful
like,
that they've saved everyone
yeah,
and that they've saved the Shire, but it's the sacrifice that's never
yeah,
going to
it's knowing that
be.
they'll never really find a home
Yeah.
there again the same way that they once had.
Hmm.
Um, which again, I think is really interesting. Again, you're saying there like that's the case of like the soldiers coming back and not being appreciated. You're talking from like quite a very British perspective there, because obviously in places like
Right.
because the UK, England, Britain, whatever you want to call us, we were very lucky in that we were, for the most part, we got other than things like the Blitz, were not subject to the horrors of war. If you want to talk about mainland Europe, which is where Tolkien spent a lot of his time during the
Oh
war,
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a very different story.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
that's where you can understand, obviously, the aspects where the scourging of the Shire comes from. I believe, don't quote me on this, but Tolkien was stationed in France for a great deal of his time during the
Mm.
war, and obviously the French famously had an absolutely awful time in World War II.
Yeah.
So I think obviously him seeing the way the civilians there were treated by these soldiers, these innocent people, I think that's got to be surely a huge inspiration for sort of his writings about the scourge of the scourge of the Shire.
Yeah.
Can't
No.
speak today apparently, but yeah, but you understand what I'm trying to say anyway. So I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
like you say, I think this is actually one of the first times I think both the book and the film are equally good, but just for entirely different
Yeah. Hmm.
reasons. I think both of them fit with Tolkien's vision. I don't think, because I think some of the things we've discussed before with Peter Jackson's changes, like the elves at Helm's Deep. I spoke to my dad about that, by the way, again. And as soon as I mentioned the second film, he was like, "Elves at Helm's Deep." He was like, he shouldn't have allowed himself. I can't believe he allowed himself that. It wasn't called the Last Alliance except for the time at Helm's Deep, and he got very angry about it. So
Oh
yeah.
my god.
So as you can see, there's a lot of passion around
Yeah.
some of Peter
Yeah. Yeah.
Jackson's changes.
There's a lot of spirited Tolkien fans out
Yeah.
there, myself included in many ways. But yeah, I can let some things go. Maybe it's nostalgia.
No.
I don't know.
And I think it's well, for whatever reason, some people can't. But my point is, I think this is one of the times where like this is still in line with Tolkien's vision. It was definitely a change that is different from the way he wrote it, but is absolutely something I could see Tolkien having
Hmm.
written. Whereas something like the elves at Helm's Deep or the Mumakil kill, those
Oh
aren't
yeah.
things that Tolkien would ever put into his book,
That's
and
all
for
for the
obvious
movie.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
It's for the sake of
So,
adaptation as well. Like
yeah.
in terms of, you know, narrative structure in book form, it is very different to film. You know, you have to kind of adhere to, in a film, a 3-act structure. Not all the time. Obviously, you can play around with it and get
Yeah.
experimental, but usually, especially with a film like of this ilk, you know, blockbuster, it has to follow that. And, you know, the third act essentially it is over at the destruction of Sauron. That is
Yeah.
where everything's concluded. You have to wrap it up. You know, you have your falling action, and then we lead into the ending. To then ramp it up, I don't think that would have worked. So,
No, I agree.
and this is why I think that the films are a great adaptation, in that they aren't exceptionally faithful. They're faithful in many
No.
ways. Don't get me wrong, but nevertheless they still touch on the spirit, I think, of what Tolkien was writing
Absolutely,
and get the
yeah.
meaning across. So as long as you do that, I'm fine with you, not ridiculously so, but playing fast and
Yeah.
loose with it just a little bit.
No, I
Yeah.
totally agree. It's like we talked about before, like there are some changes that very nearly happened that would have completely undermined aspects of it. Like, for example, Aragorn's duel with Ghost Sauron or whatever it
Which
was
you,
going to be,
yeah, so
which
Sauron fully forms in his suit of armor that you see
yeah,
at
and
the
fights
prologue,
Aragorn, and
and
that would have
yeah,
been just appalling. So
yeah.
yeah, very glad that one didn't happen. Even then, some people are annoyed that Aragorn kills the mouth of Sauron, because obviously that doesn't happen in the books either. The mouth of Sauron
Mhm.
just sort of goes back inside, and that's about it. Um, but again, like I think for the most part, like you say, the spirit really does come through these films, and you get a sense of exactly what Tolkien was trying to portray. You still have this hero's journey played out in sort of almost three different ways, with the hobbits and with Aragorn and all the rest of them, and
Mhm.
sort of this fading of magic and this rise of the Age of Men, and the idea that the smallest people, the hobbits, can have the greatest impacts and things like that. So all of these themes and morals are still very much present within the adaptations, which I think is lacking from some of the later works, like The Hobbit, for example, which sort of
Mhm.
miss the point to go for the spectacle, whereas here the spectacle is just sort of mixed with the moral, with the message, and you don't really lose out on anything too significant.
Yeah, I agree. I think another strong point about Return of the King as well, which will take us more into sort of like the film now itself, is the tone.
Absolutely.
So even watching this back in the day, like the prologue sequence, with the history of
Yeah.
Smeagol and Deagle and everything like that, I was terrified, legitimately
Yeah.
terrified. Like I mentioned that I was uneasy. I was probably a little bit scared, but I was uneasy in Two Towers with some of the orcs.
Yeah.
With the Merry and Pippin thing where it chases them into the forest, and I was like, oh, this is a little bit intense and a little bit scary. I still loved it though.
Yeah.
But this, like, I was genuinely creeped out by. There is, Peter Jackson sort of like flexing his horror muscles again. But that opening scene, like the mid transformation makeup, like
Mm.
it was horrific. The biting into the fish raw, the quick little flashes of him turning into the
Yeah.
camera, and how gaunt and his oh god, it was horrible. And I think it's a perfect prologue for the film, because I think that footage actually there was originally meant to be used in Two Towers.
Yeah.
When Frodo was saying, Gollum's like, what did you call me? That was your name once, a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Smeagol. It was then going to go into this whole extended backstory. But I think it's perfect here because throughout these films, certainly with Two Towers, we touched on this last time as well, is that Gollum, when Frodo sees Gollum, he sees himself. And it's almost like what he wants to pull Gollum back to the good, because it will give him a sense that there is hope for him as a
Yeah.
ring bearer,
Absolutely.
right? He doesn't want to see him be taken to the extreme as Gollum has done. So I think starting with Gollum's backstory and seeing how far he falls also does a credit to Frodo's character and his state in
Absolutely.
this one.
Yeah.
Because when you see Frodo from the opening frame of this film, he's like gone off the
He,
deep end.
he's
It's
not
that
looking good.
progression.
No.
No, not at all.
He's
And
a
even
yeah.
starting the film with, Sam's being peppy as always and trying to pick up the pieces. And it's, I've rationed it. It should be enough for the journey home. And it's
Yeah.
just that look like there isn't going to be one. I haven't
Yeah.
even entertained the idea of a return journey.
Yeah.
And so much of this film is done with just a glance, a look, no dialogue. It's just
Yeah.
fantastic. But I love that starting point for the film. And for me, that just sets the tone of the rest of the
Absolutely.
film.
I do think it is the one part of, well, not the one part, there are some elements of Lord of the Rings that haven't aged well, and I do think that scene is one of them, because I think the underwater scenes in Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings have not aged well at all. It's the only time I think their special effects let them down.
Mhm.
And it's particularly obvious, I think, in the fight between Deagle and
Even at the
Smeagol.
time,
Yeah,
it didn't look great.
it's not the best. But despite that, I agree. I think it's such a great opening way, and it sort of sets the idea that there are so many of these, like, not necessarily redemptions, but like parallels between sort of different characters that are really present in Return of the King. We talked already about like Theoden and Denethor, and you have it as well with Aragorn and Isildur. Garrett, in the books at least more, you have it more with Gandalf and Saruman. These little parallels between the sort of redeeming their lines, if you will. For example, so like Aragorn is redeeming the line of Isildur and of the people of Gondor. Frodo is showing that the people of the Shire. I know that Gollum isn't of the Shire, but they're of a similar sort of history, and sort of showing that they can sort of have the resolve to resist the pull of the ring, and all these sorts of other little things. So I think it's such a nice way to sort of get that theming in present so quickly. And obviously, you say the cut to Frodo and Sam then really sort of drives that home, which is a really strong way to open it, because you're immediately then thrown back into sort of the desperation, which I think is such a key part of Return of the King. In like the Two Towers, it starts to creep through a little bit. You have obviously Helm's Deep and the sack of Rohan, but it still feels almost like kind of like a jaunt. They're having a bit of fun and killing some orcs or whatever. But Return of the King, the sort of desperation, the fact that like if they don't, it's not the fact that they need to win; it's they need to win now. Like
Yeah,
there is
yeah.
like there's a case of like they have been holding out for a long time, but they just can't do it anymore, and that sort of time pressure is really building, and you see that really well with Frodo and Sam in that sort of opening scene.
And we talked about the structure last time as well with Two Towers, how, the book, it goes onwards with Frodo's journey and they get to Minas Morgul and they do the whole Shelob thing and, Frodo getting captured and taken to Cirith Ungol and everything. But I think moving it to the third film, we talked about the tone there, how it does feel a lot darker, and I know that's thrown
Yeah.
around quite a lot, but it really does. This film's bleak, and I think a lot of that is to do with those locations in particular as well. The closer you get to Mordor, the more evil everything is and oppressive and horrible. So I think saving those locations, as I mentioned, Minas Morgul, Cirith Ungol, Shelob, all of that stuff, and Mordor, the Plains of Gorgoroth, saving that for the third film really does a service to sort of like the aesthetic and the overall feel that you get from the
I mean,
film.
just think of the difference of, obviously I know in the books it wasn't the case, but in the films you finished off with Osgiliath and these forests outside of Gondor. It's lush and green, and I know it's like grimy now. We have the white walls of Gondor and all the rest of it, and then cut straight to Minas Morgul with its just black and green. I love the color palette from Minas Morgul. I think it's brilliant. It's that has that beautiful, like, sickly, ethereal kind of glow around it. Like it's such, and it immediately shows the sort of transition between the sort of the tones of the two films, and even with the other stories, obviously with the Hunters and Merry and Pippin, Gandalf, and the rest of them, their locations as well are that much bleaker. Like you leave the open plains of Rohan fairly quickly for sort of the Path of the Dead and all the rest of it, and all of a sudden it's all getting this sort of grey and dark and murkier. And I think it's absolutely. I think the art direction, I suppose. I know it's not really art, but you know what I mean.
No, conceptual
really,
design and everything, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that really helps to sort of set the tone of the film and make it that much darker and grittier without ever having to explicitly like say it. You can tell how much more serious the situation is just from the way the scenes themselves are presented. I think that's something people miss out a lot on when they talk about Return of the King.
I'm glad you talked about Minas Morgul there. That's definitely one of my favorites, and sort of going back to one of my cinema memories as well. The bit where it's one of my favorite shots as well. It's so goddamn cool. The Witch King, where he rides up on his fell beast and it perches on the side, and you've got that, the Mordor theme just blaring in the background. When it screams, that was deafening in the cinema. That's where they're covering their ears. That's pretty much like what I was doing in the cinema. It was so loud. And I think I went. Was it last year these got re-released at the cinema, or was it the year before?
Yeah,
I've lost track of time.
Yeah.
But even then, it was still really loud. But I maybe 10-year-old me, underdeveloped ears at that point. Oh my god, it was absolutely blaring. But yeah, I loved it. And we kind of, if we get onto like the Three Hunters now and sort of like pick up where they begin as well. The whole Sauron thing was massive, and another one of my fond memories of all these films isn't just seeing the films in the cinema or whatnot or the merch behind it. It was that wait, that agonizing wait, knowing that there was going to be an extended edition, and waiting till the following Christmas to get that extended edition, because that's when it came out. I got them for Christmas, so it would have been. So the film came out. What was it? The December of 2003. Yeah, so it would have been the December of 2004.
Yeah.
And I remember knowing that I was going to get it for Christmas. It was the big thing out, and I was out of my mind. I couldn't wait to watch it and see some of this new stuff. You had, was it half hour of extras in Fellowship, 45 in Two Towers? I was like, well, it's the only way is up, baby. Like, how much have you got?
And you were right, yeah.
It's massive.
Like a full hour, I think, at least, of
Return
of the King. There's so many, in my opinion, crucial scenes that are just removed. Yeah.
And I remember waking up at like 3 a.m, like going, "Oh, the presents are." I was absolutely dying to watch it, and I got it. And I think I had a portable DVD player at the time, and it must have been 4 o'clock in the morning or something. Just opening it, just watching it on my little portable, and just freaking out at the new stuff, going like, "Oh, that's an extended scene. That's a new scene." And then you hit, oh my god, you hit that Saruman scene in the extended edition. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, I was rushing down. I was like, "Mom, look at this! There's a Saruman in the film." And she's making dinner. Like, "Oh yeah, that's nice, dear.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool. Yeah,
whatever."
that's cool, Chris.
And I was like, "You bear witness me, damn it! Like, witness this." And it is absolutely integral that that's in the film. And
Yeah,
I know that Christopher Lee probably rightfully got the hump that he wasn't in the film. I can
yeah,
understand why though. Like the whole reason the extended editions are a thing is because that was how the film was originally shot. They
yeah,
couldn't put that into cinemas due to the length, so they had to cut out what they needed to.
yeah,
Maybe you could argue that they could have cut out a few more of the action beats in the theatrical edition in order to get that Christopher Lee scene
yeah.
in
But
there. But yeah,
I
he's written
understand
out.
why there are
Yeah.
some things that have to sort of be removed, and I understand why that was one. I personally argue that it shouldn't have been. But I can say that from a position of hindsight, which is a lot easier to do than when you're actually presenting this film to people. They say
Mhm.
got the action beats. You're absolutely right. You definitely could have, but people will be. If that's why that for the most part that's why people went to see these films. It wasn't for the introspective character moments, although
Yeah, oh, yeah.
again I believe that's one of the integral parts. They went there to see people fight things with swords and axes and bows and arrows.
Mhm.
So I totally understand why they removed it, but I think it is a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, and it's taking some of those elements from the Scouring of the Shire and sort of giving
Yeah,
him a definitive endpoint. It might piss off the book fans, but you can see what is. And that death scene as well, where he hits that spike.
yeah,
I've seen some people say like, "Oh, Peter Jackson wanted to," because he played Dracula, obviously Christopher
yeah.
Lee. He wanted to give him one last stake through the heart, and I was like, "Oh, I never even clocked that. I don't know if that was intentional. If it is, that's a great reference." But
I mean,
uh,
I just love the stories, obviously, about Christopher Lee's direction during that scene. I'm sure you've
yes,
heard, yeah, the trivia.
yes, go on, go
I'm
on.
sure anyone who's watching this will have heard it as well. I'm going to say it again anyway. The fact that Peter Jackson giving Christopher Lee of directions on how to act after Grimo betrays him and stabs him, only to be corrected by Christopher Lee because Christopher Lee, having served in the SAS during World War II, knows the sound someone makes when they're stabbed in the back, is one of the coolest stories I think is anyone has ever said on the set of any film. So, no, no, I know what this sounds like. Leave it to me. I got this. Don't worry.
That's intense, isn't it?
He is
Like, could you
just. I
imagine?
love every story about Christopher Lee. He is one of the most insane human beings that to have ever existed, and yeah, I totally understand his chagrin at being not included in the film
Yeah.
because I think, yeah,
I
it
think
does feel
because
almost.
he was one of the most passionate about Tolkien.
Oh yeah,
I read Lord of the Rings every year, kind of thing.
yeah.
Meeting
He's
Tolkien,
met
clearly
Tolkien,
had that.
yeah, obviously, and no, I think so. I can see why he'd find it disrespectful, but again, these things happen,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
And I like one of Dominic Monaghan's stories as well. This was off the podcast that they're doing.
Mm.
He does with Billy Boyd, the Friendship
Yeah,
Onion. He says that he didn't spend loads of time with Christopher Lee, but he had one time they got picked up in the car together. I think they were walking together, and he was just kind of passing some life lessons, and they were talking about his time in in the SAS or whatever.
yeah,
And he was like, "Give me your pen," and I think he had like Dominic Monaghan had like a fountain pen or something in his
right.
breast pocket, and he just took it and he kind of looked at it and he threw it directly into a tree, just like thunk. It's like he's almost like John Wick, isn't he? He's like
Yeah,
this
he is
elemental
just.
character. Like he can kill someone with a pen. Like
He's
it's
just
oh
absurd. Like the fact I think obviously he released a death metal album on his
yeah
92nd
yeah
birthday. Sorry,
yeah
a Christmas themed death metal album on his 92nd birthday, and it's just what a man.
oh it's just it's
I miss him. I
incomparable.
miss him dearly, honestly.
Yeah. Actually,
But
jumping ahead to The Hobbit, that's one of the best things is that,
oh yeah,
you could argue that maybe the story didn't need Saruman in there, but just seeing those behind the scenes where he came back and
yeah,
just,
he was
he's,
so
he's
happy to
wonderful.
be there, and I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
But the Three Hunters then. So
Yes, let's.
honestly, not to be like a Debbie Downer, I mean, I adore these films with every
Oh yeah,
fiber of
no,
my
of
being, and these
course.
don't break the films, but I do
No.
more so maybe than the other two. I have a couple of little quibbles with this, and honestly, most of them come from like the Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli
Yeah.
storyline. It's mostly
I
how some scenes are handled, and I think it's Peter Jackson. We're seeing the shreds of like Peter Jackson at his most I won't say at his most extreme because if you watch a lot of his older films, then
no, but I think
excess
he's
is all part of his
yeah.
style, right? But
No, I think his ego starts to creep into sort of his
yeah,
direction a little bit more in this, and I think obviously that's even more prevalent in his later films like The Hobbit. But
oh, King Kong, yeah, as
yeah,
well.
well, King Kong was an obvious one, obviously, yeah. But yeah, again, I think it's sure exactly what you're going to say. But the Path of the Dead sequence, just in general, is probably my least favorite part of the film. It's the only part of the film that I ever watched. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, here we get this bit again, all right. Like, it's not to say that it's bad. There's some really cool moments. It's just and like I know it's meant to be weird, and that's kind of the point, but also it's just I don't know, it just feels so alien and out of place, not from like an in-universe perspective, from like a meta perspective. It feels like a part of the film that they forgot about and just stuck some stuff in there to fill time. And it's just a
Mhm.
very odd sequence that I just don't really enjoy. I hate the characterization of Gimli in it.
Yeah.
I think it's a massive disservice to his character. And I know that like as the film was on, he became more and more comic relief, but I think like he still has some moments in the Two Towers where he's just like allowed to just be like a full-on dwarf and just go absolutely ham with an axe and just tear apart people. I don't think the Return of the King ever really redeems him in that respect. I can't think of any single standout Gimli moment in Return of the King.
I'm trying to think of one scene where Gimli kind of plays it straight the whole time. It
Yeah,
seems like every scene that I'm thinking of Gimli is comic relief in some way, whether it's like a quippy line that he says, whether it's some kind of slapstick comedy.
yeah.
And that's
There's a
where,
drinking contest at the start, and like I say, again, a great scene. I love that scene. I think it really shows his relationship with Legolas and all the rest of it, and it is a funny scene. But like, it's a shame to see him reduced to such like a shell of a character.
mm,
The same can be said to Legolas, but it is in much more, but in a cooler way, in the
yeah,
sense that Legolas is reduced to just the guy who does cool things. Like, there's no real characterization to him either.
mm,
And he never really shows any emotion or really has any sort of anything. Again, there's that one scene I think we spoke about in the Two Towers review where he's just looking at the sky and
the
talking.
stars are veiled,
Yeah,
a
I'm like, yep,
sleepless
yeah, you're
malice.
right. It is cloudy, Legolas. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that. Like, again, and you just have again, it just feels lazy.
Mm,
And that's my biggest issue with the whole Three Hunters storyline is that so much of it is just Peter Jackson being like, okay, it feels like they were toys he didn't want to play with, but he had to include them in the film. So he just gives them some bit stuff to do so he can focus on the stuff he actually cares about. Which,
mm,
I get that. That's the case in a lot of films. It's the case, certainly the case in like you see these massive team up films now with like the Avengers and things like that. You can tell which ones are the directors and writers' favorites and which ones are getting sidelined. And I think that was the case here. He just gave them sort of very quick and easy, sort of easy to access personalities. Gimli's the funny one. Legolas is the cool one. Cool. That's them out the way. Let's focus on the writing on the important characters, and I get that because they're
mm,
not important characters in the grand scheme of things in the main sort of plot of this film. Um, and again, they obviously often use as foils to Aragorn. Like Legolas is used as sort of like the more uh, cold and detached side of Aragorn, and then Gimli's this more sort of jovial side to him, and you can see him sort of play up both of them really well. And again, I think Viggo Mortensen gives an absolutely fantastic performance in this film,
mm.
and he really is the saving grace of the Three Hunters storyline, in my opinion. Um, right from obviously the beacons are lit, and like the genuine sort of like care that he seems to give at all points, and you get to see this sort of transition from the ranger to the leader and all the rest of it. And I really love all those little aspects. I think he really is able to bring out of Aragorn. But yeah, overall, I know I'm saying out this really negatively, but don't worry, I still love this sequence. But yeah, the Path of the Dead in particular, I just think is such
Great
a
point.
yeah.
Yeah. See, I'm mixed on it in that, when you read the book, obviously the Paths of Dead is in there in many ways, but
Mm.
every time I read it, it's almost like I keep forgetting that they're in there. That sorry, Aragorn goes off. I think it's the Stone of Eric or something, isn't it? He goes to, he meets them
Something
and
like
says
that,
like,
yeah.
"Fight for me" or something like that, and then it just describes a mist that kind of follow him, and that's basically it. Like they
Yeah.
don't, they do show up at the battle, but it's told in hindsight with Legolas, and he's like, "I saw from afar." Wisps, kind of doing all
Yeah.
these wonderful things. It's very much in the background. They mentioned that predominantly, I think that they used the Army of the Dead to take, get control of the ships and
Yeah,
um,
so
the
if
Corsairs of Umbar and everything. They kind of
exactly,
ruined that
yeah.
attack, and that's basically their big contribution is to stop
Yeah.
that naval attack from the south. And
Yeah,
then,
as far as I'm aware,
yeah,
they're not present at the Battle of Pelennor Field, at least not nearly in the same way that they
not in
are
a
in the film.
proactive
The
way.
film
No,
was it
no.
was yeah, it was one of my it's that's my that, in fact that is my least favorite part of the film, which is the fact that like you have this cool battle, you have like the charge of the Rohirrim, and like this back and forth of like feeling so desperate and how could they possibly win? And the ghosts come and it's over. I'm like, oh, okay.
It's
So
very
we
easy,
actually didn't
isn't
need to
it?
do
Yeah,
any of that then. We could have just hid inside the walls for like another day. Then Aragorn would have rocked up and all of them would die and we would have lost no men and it would have been absolutely fine. Like it's such a terrible way to handle that fight. And like I get that it's a quick way of doing it, and it gets you to move the film along, because if you didn't, you'd have to have then the rest of the Battle of Pelennor Fields. But
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it just feels it's so lazy, especially because it sort of misses some of the more interesting parts of like the Return of the King. It's not really touched on in the film, but like the fact that at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, Battle of Minas Tirith, isn't the only battle going on right now. You have the Easterlings and the Southmen. I can't remember what they're called.
The
Southmons.
Haradrim, isn't it?
Yeah,
Southmons, yeah, it's
yeah.
also called, yeah.
Them anyway. They attack like Dale and sort of like Erebor and the Lonely
Yeah.
Mountain, and all these places, and the goblins the sort of the Misty Mountains and stuff. They attack Lothlorien and all these sorts of other battles going on, and that's why no one can come to help. And like the battle in Gondor isn't just at Minas Tirith; like all the other cities in Gondor are under siege, and that's where these reinforcements come from. You have the armies of the dead; they clear out those other cities, and then gradually. It's all done off screen, obviously, but gradually Aragorn's little armada builds up from these other sort of cities, and then they go and they come and defend Minas Tirith, and that's such a much more interesting way of doing it, because then you don't have the ghosts coming in, rocking up and destroying everything. It's still the men of Gondor saving the men of Gondor. It's still man versus orc, and you still have that much more interesting style of storytelling than just the Deus Ex Machina, which is just so boring.
I think it's how it's edited as well, because I was thinking to Two Towers as a comparison that you could kind of argue it's the same thing, where Gandalf shows up with Éomer and the Rohirrim reinforcements, but I think thinking back to it, they charge down that ridge and then we cut to the Ents and that's playing out. So narratively, you're like, okay, they're still fighting that battle at Helm's Deep. Then we cut to Frodo and you have the whole speech with Sam. In your mind, you're like, okay, they're still fighting that battle. And then during that montage, during the speech, that's when you cut back to Theoden going, victory, we have victory. So you could argue that they did whittle the numbers down as much as they could during like an actual fight. But you don't get that with Return of the King. When that army of the dead shows up, you see them swarm over that Luma kill and then cut to that wide shot and they're cleansing the city. They swarm around the city and it's all done. It's over. So it does feel very quick. I know there's a lot of story that's left to tell and there's a limited time to do it in, but it does feel very easy. It doesn't hurt the film, but it is something that I do notice about it every time. I'll agree with that. And going to the Past of the Dead thing, as I mentioned, I do like that they dialed up their involvement more so in the film and made it a little bit more visual with the Army of the Dead compared to the book, which it almost feels like a weird offshoot in the book. I'm like, well, you went to set up these characters, these forces, and then you basically don't see them. It's very perplexing to me every single time that I read the books. But it is how it's handled, and I agree that maybe it's the ego of Peter Jackson coming through a bit more. I know that he likes his dumb slapstick stuff, and sometimes it's fine and sometimes it works. And, by the time we get to the Hobbit films, oh boy, is there a lot of that in those films. And most of it all kind of seems to be centered around the Paths of the Dead for some reason with me. A lot of my problems with this film is in that section. We talked about how Gimli's handled in that scene. The constant cutbacks, it's like almost like a series of like vignettes, like comedy segments. It's, we're going through wisps of ghosts and everything. And then Gimli's there like, and it seems like it goes, if they cut to that once and it just went like, and then cut and we move on, that might have been more fine, but they linger on that joke for ages and it kind of outstays its welcome. Then, what's the next comedy segment? Oh, they're walking on skulls. Don't look down, Gimli. Guess what? He looks down. And then he's like doing this weird thing as he's crunching on the bones. Again, goes on for way too long. And I think it's the just the over the top quality that Peter Jackson brings to his films sometimes. And again, sometimes it feels larger than life and great. Sometimes it goes off the deep end. When that tsunami of skulls comes pouring out of the mountain in the extended edition, I'm like, this is physically impossible. Like the amount of dead people, and why are there skulls there? Why are they buried here? Like I thought, didn't these people just flee into the mountains to like escape their oath essentially and just kind of like died of starvation and were cursed in the mountains? Why is there like behind this wall, why is there a mausoleum, like a catacomb of millions of skulls, and it's millions come pouring out of this thing, and it's all, I don't know why. It's just done for like visual spectacle. It's just bizarre. And then the worst scene in the whole extended edition for me, the worst scene, and I wish it wasn't in there, is the Corsairs rocking up. Fire a warning shot past the bosun's ear. You have Peter Jackson in the least
Well,
subtlest
we
cameo that he ever
warned
has in
you.
these films.
Just shut up.
It's that they're on like this awkward green screen that looks like it was done in
Yeah.
post. Like, oh, let's just throw a scene in there because it's funny. Let's just get all the cast and the crew in a shot for this. You and whose army? This army, and they all come pouring out. And this is where I actually prefer the theatrical cut in many ways. In that I think the theatrical cut had an element of suspense to it when those ships showed up at the end at Pelennor Fields. Come on, you sea rats, get off your ships, and then you get your reveal that Aragorn, like, yes, he managed to wrangle the army of the dead.
Yeah.
This is great. That was more of a surprise cinematically, I think, than kind of being spoon-fed. Because now, when you watch the extended cut, when those ships show up, you know that they're
Yeah.
on board. Like,
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's them. Yeah.
there's no
Like
tension there.
the only way you have tension there is if you just forgot about it. Which honestly, I'm pretty sure I did the first time that I watched it. I just forgot that Aragorn had his whole little side adventure because all the other stuff is that much more interesting than the Paths of the Dead. I'm like, yeah, they're the mountains, whatever. And I have the battle. I'm like, oh yeah, they did a thing. Oh yeah, the ghosts, cool. Yeah, like that was the surprise for me. The fact that they existed because I had just completely forgotten about their relevance in the story, which I think kind of speaks to sort of the quality of that
Yeah,
storyline. If I just
definitely.
forgot that it happened until the resolution happened.
But you do get some nice payoffs as well. Like I talk about Gimli being overly comic relief. I like the bit where where Legolas takes down the Mumakil. I'm fine with
Yeah,
that.
it's
It is
great.
completely over the top, but yeah, at least back then, simpler times, before the Hobbit trilogy, before the Dark Times, before Desolation of Smaug, and all the stuff he gets up into, in Battle of the Five Armies. It was this gag, it was this thing that was built up over a trilogy, and it had a payoff in this film. You got the sense that Peter Jackson was making this film. He never thought he'd do a film with Legolas in again, and he wanted to go out on a high.
Yeah,
It's the big spectacle finale of the battle of the Battle of Pelennor Fields in many ways. But I think it works because it's punctuated with that brilliant callback of that still only counts as one.
just one.
Which
Yeah,
is,
again.
been this gag that has been built up since movie 2, and it's a wonderful payoff, and it always gets a reaction out of everyone, and I love it. And then the big thing as well between the two characters, it's one of the only scenes of depth with Gimli, is, I never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf. What about side by side with a friend?
I could
I
do
could
that.
do that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful. So I can't come down on Gimli like thunder too much, because it is the stuff that needs to be there is there,
Yeah,
and
it's
especially the
just.
stuff at the coronation as well.
Oh, the
Uh,
coronation's beautiful. I love
it's
the
wonderful.
coronation. Yeah. Again, don't get me wrong. The conclusion of the 300 storyline is stunning, but that's the same with every storyline in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And again, like I say, Aragorn's path throughout the whole thing is really compelling. I love that. I love that they withhold obviously Anduril until the base of sort of the mountain. That's what he uses then to sort of show that he's the true heir. And obviously because of the arc they set up for Aragorn in the films, which isn't present in the books, the fact that he's the reluctant king and the reluctant heir to the throne, the fact that him taking the sword is him finally accepting that he has to be the king, and then for every scene after that, he is as kingly as a king could be, and it's just absolutely brilliant to see this payoff, like you say, for this journey, this arc that Aragorn's been going along, and I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Again, a change I prefer in the films compared
Yeah,
to the book is what they
absolutely.
do with
Yeah,
Aragorn, and that moment
100%.
where he unsheaths Anduril and the theme, the music
Yeah.
kicks in. It's wonderful. It's
Although
such a
that
great
sword
moment.
is always longer than I think it is. Like that is, they say, such a long tracking shot of the sword. I'm like, right, okay, we
It's
get it. It's
still
a big
going.
sword. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a big sword.
It's a massive sword. But yeah, going to that Sauron thing as well. The footage is out there. You can see it on
Yeah.
YouTube. I'm so glad, because that would have just ruined the whole story. Peter Jackson originally said that he felt like Aragorn needed to go toe to toe with Sauron because it was the conclusion of his arc. It was that him coming to terms, doing what Isildur couldn't do,
Yeah.
essentially. But Isildur did it, and he
Yeah,
did
Isildur
technically
did beat
beat
Sauron. Yeah,
Sauron.
that wasn't
So
Isildur's arc.
I'm
I mean,
so glad they got rid of that, and we got the
Aragorn
CGI
did what
troll out
Isildur
of
didn't
nowhere,
do.
which is
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
But
Aragorn did what Isildur didn't do in the first film. He refused the ring. That he's
done.
already done that bit. That
Yeah.
wasn't the bit we're interested in. We've seen that bit out. It's the rest of it. Yeah.
It just diminishes everything that's going on with Frodo. The reason why Aragorn led that final charge against the Black Gate, it would have just undone so much. So
I love
I'm
that
glad that
final
they
charge
saw
as well.
sense, and yeah.
It's such a nice little scene, obviously, because it's a case of just like, and I get there are aspects of it that I think are different from the book. Like in the book, obviously, Merry isn't present because taking out the Witch
Yeah.
King just basically destroyed him. And there are lots of other characters as well. Like, and the fact like it's a much smaller and more diminished host than the one that's going there in the film. In the
Yeah.
film, as a child, I often thought they were going there to actually fight through. I don't think it was as clear as it perhaps could have been to at least a younger audience that they're just going there essentially to die. Like, whereas in the books, I think that's much more apparent. It's a case of like, okay, there's like 30 of us, but we can like put on a show for like 20 minutes while Frodo throws us into the ring in the fire. We can do that. But that being said, Aragorn's speech, obviously, and the final charge for Frodo and all the rest of it is just so brilliant. I mean, I would love to hear the thoughts of any of the Gondorian soldiers who are charging into battle for Frodo, because they don't know. There's like, Frodo.
I don't think they would have heard it at the back. He whispers it. I think they're fine. It's just for the people in the front. It's not for the people in the cheap seats at the back of the crowd.
No, it's just for the Fellowship race. It's for his real friends, not only these Gondorian scum. But no, I love that little journey, and obviously it all comes to that brilliant conclusion with the coronation, and yeah, tears every time.
Yeah. But going to the speech at the Black Gate, that was when I was reading the books, and obviously because I was so familiar with the films and I hadn't read the books at that point. When I finally did get to the books, one of my biggest surprises was that this Aragorn speech isn't in the book. He doesn't deliver a final speech at the Battle of the Black Gate, and the speech in the film, just how it sounds very Tolkien.
Oh yeah,
it sounds like I was so certain it was something that he had written in some way. Like, did they take it from another battle speech and move it to there? It's a completely originally created one for the films. And when I read the books, it feels missing. It feels like lacking. It needs that speech, And Tolkien can write some phenomenal battle speeches, and he does throughout all of the books. But for some reason, he didn't give Aragorn one.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about Tolkien's prose, and Tolkien's prose is lacking in some situations. Fight me, but like he could, like you say, he can deliver a speech. Like, obviously, the Charge of the Rohirrim has like the speech is like a lot longer than the one in the film. If they combine about 3 of his speeches and just chop them up and make that into one speech in the film. But I'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the sort of Rohirrim bit. But again, he can write some great speeches. So the fact that he didn't for the final fight is such a bizarre thing, and I'm really glad they added that in the film, because it just feels so fitting. This sort of this farewell, almost this final, like, this a little bit of desperation and the last stand of man and all the rest of it. It's just wonderful. So there are some excellent parts of the 300's storyline.
One of the best shots as well. It was in the trailer, and I think I saw a comment somewhere saying that I mean, I can't remember the special feature. There's a lot of special features. There's like 9 hours of special features. Fight me, but the bit where the horse kind of rears up on its hind legs when he turns it round and holds the sword up, I think the horse wasn't meant to rear up.
Yeah.
But it looks so awesome, like in the final shot.
These horses, between Shadowfax just doing that in one take and this horse rearing up, these horses, they're the best actors in
the actors need to step up their game. Like, the horses
they know exactly what they're doing. Yeah.
Really quickly on the coronation, because I know. Oh my god, this might actually be quite a long one, because we're coming up to an hour. Arwen is a very interesting character in this. Now, there's a lot of things that I don't really understand, and I don't even really, and even the book doesn't concern itself with Arwen. I think for the first time she shows up in Fellowship when they get to Rivendell in like a fleeting mention, and then obviously she's wedded and actually gets some dialogue at the end. The whole fact that Arwen's fate is tied to the fate of the ring, I think it was, artificially creating tension for the final fight, and that the romance angle to the story is like that needs to also have a presence during the final battle. And there's the extended scene as well, which I'm not too keen on as well, where Aragorn confronts Sauron in the Palantir, and he's like, "Behold the sword of Elendil." And then he drops the Even Star necklace, and it shatters, and we crossfade into the next scene. I much prefer the transition in the theatrical cut, where it's Gimli going, what is it? Small chance of success. What are we waiting for? Cut to them charging out, going to battle. I think that's a much more effective edit and cut there. But yeah, I'm really confused about the Arwen stuff. I love the first bit. I love where she has the vision of her son, and going back to Rivendell and becoming more frail and more weak. I'm fine with that, and becoming mortal. But where they hit you with that fact towards the end, I think it's when Elrond shows up to deliver the sword, isn't it? It's like, Arwen is dying, and she won't.
Fault, so deal with that, Aragorn.
Yes.
Like, dude, not the time.
Yeah, it's like
inappropriate.
yeah, he didn't have enough baggage and enough
Yeah,
stuff going on at the moment. So that stuff was a bit perplexing, but obviously by the time we get to the coronation, the
yeah.
cinematography there as well, the costumes is absolutely wonderful.
I think as well,
And the
given
line.
given how
Yeah.
little screen time the two of them have together, the chemistry between Viggo Mortensen and Liv Tyler is actually really strong. Just like the
Yeah.
just from like without words, just looks and like expressions. I think is and I think that's really key at the coronation. That the genuine sort of I don't know. I think it's like the first time we've really seen Aragorn happy.
Mhm.
He's had a
Yeah.
bad time, and you just see that sort of that he's at peace with everything. And I think
Mhm.
the Arwen stuff with that is just is wonderful. And this sort of again, it's a wonderful conclusion. Like
Mhm.
we're going to be talking about the endings in detail later, but like yeah, I mean, the ending of his arc is just perfect. And while I totally understand criticisms by people like George R. R. Martin of like what happens after the cameras are rolled, like and like what is Aragorn actually like as a king, I respect that. Like, yeah, Tolkien really didn't think that through, but it's a case of you. That's not the point.
Mhm.
Like, it's the end of that story. We don't need to know what Aragorn's tax policies were. We don't need to know
Mhm.
how he dealt with the remaining orcs in sort of the Middle Earth, and to sort of focus on those moments would be dumb,
Yeah.
for lack of
Well,
a
I
better
mean,
word.
Tolkien
So
did start writing a sequel to The Lord of the Rings called The New Shadow, which
yeah,
I think he got like 3 pages into it or like a treatment outline and gave it up because he was
yeah,
like, this would do a disservice to the ending, and it absolutely would. And
yeah,
it is that sense of, good conquers all at a cost, at a lingering cost
yeah.
kind of thing. But ultimately, everything's going to be right in the world now. Evil is finally overcome, and maybe more franchises need to kind of take a leaf
Yeah, I
out of
mean,
Tolkien's book.
I've said this before. I am so tired of like the pessimistic view that everything seems to have these days. Everything is so like, oh yeah, you win, but your mom dies, or like some stupid random thing. It's just like, just let good win and evil lose, and we all go home, and everyone's having a good time. And it's one of the reasons I really like. Again, we talked about before with like the Scouring of the Shire. I like that that's not there because I like that the good guys win and then they just
Mhm.
go home and then it's nice and they have a pint and it's just a pretty good time. And
But it's
yeah, I
classic
think
fairy tale story, isn't it? And that's
honestly, and
inherently
I
where
think
Middle-earth started from, was fairy tale storytelling, which is
I
great.
think it's something that every fantasy series post Lord of the Rings has missed out on because they miss again this nuance. Like it's not a case of like you say, there are sacrifices, Boromir dies and all the rest of it, but like things don't need to be dark and edgy. Don't get me wrong, I love me some dark fantasy. The Witcher series on well, not necessarily I haven't seen the second season yet, but
Mhm.
the book series is excellent, and that's very dark fantasy. Game of Thrones, the book series, excellent dark fantasy, and have this sort of great realism. And there's absolutely a place for that. But I do love that Lord of the Rings isn't that at all. I love that it has this wonderful, just warm conclusion of just yeah. I just think
Mhm.
that's nice,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, definitely, lacking in a lot of things, and obviously the line in that moment as well, "My friends, you bow to no one." That
Yeah.
mu
Again, tears every
Oh,
time. It's
absolute yeah.
just yeah, it's just good. Everything
And,
about it. I also love the reactions of the hobbits to that moment. Just
yeah.
touch on that. I love how they all have their own reaction. Like Frodo's not really with it. Sam's embarrassed. Pippin's loving the attention. He's like, "Yep, I am the hero. I have saved all, despite doing the least of any of the hobbits at any
Mhm.
point during these films." And like, I love that. I love those little moments of characterization were so
Mhm.
wonderful. And I keep saying the word wonderful, but it is such a wonderful conclusion to those stories.
What I like about is, and this might be talking too much about Frodo, obviously we're gonna say Frodo and everything to the end, but, how each ending final shot of those multiple endings always is a close up of Frodo
Yeah,
and how disconnected he is. He's not smiling. He only smiles when he gets on that boat to head into the
yeah.
west, which is just fantastic. And you don't pick up on that when you watch it for the first time,
No,
maybe
of
not even
course
the
not.
second time, but as you go on, it's structured so beautifully. But moving on to more good stuff then. So, we talked about the positives of the coronation. Let's move on to Rohan.
Yeah, let's.
Oh
Speaking,
my God. How do we start with Rohan?
I
But
mean, well,
it's
let's
the
start with the
best
start
stuff.
of Rohan. Obviously, you have the opening scenes of the film are about Rohan predominantly. You have sort
Mhm.
of like, at least especially in the extended cut, you have obviously the resolution with Isengard and Saruman and the Three Hunters line, and then you have that crucial moment when Pippin picks up the Palantir um, and rides off with Gandalf, and the Fellowship once again, what little remains of the Fellowship splits. And you have the direction then with sort of Eowyn, I think, is one of the most interesting characters in this aspect in this film. Sorry, you get the sort of the introduction to her character in the Two Towers. You get this internal conflict, which is really interesting, but you don't really get any payoff for that. Like you said, I think originally there was going to be a part in Two Towers where the orcs break through and she fights them off with a sword. And while that would have had like a nice payoff for her character in one film, it would certainly have undermined the journey she went through in this film. So I'm really glad they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think obviously the payoff with Eowyn is fantastic. I mean, yes, killing off an undead king with a grammatical error is bold, but
It reminds me of Macbeth a little bit as well. You
yeah,
know, no one of woman born type
yeah, which I think
situation.
is
Like,
definitely
yeah.
intentional. There's no way that Tolkien, the father of classics,
Mm.
would have missed out on that
You
little.
had Burnham Wood as well, kind of
Yeah, exactly.
marching
Yeah,
as well,
until
taking that
until the
literally.
wood walks, and yeah, exactly. I don't think that's unintentional at all. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely an intentional thing. But again, I think Eowyn's journey is fantastic, and I think that once you remove Aragorn from Eowyn, she's a much more interesting character. We talked a little bit how you didn't like the sort of very shoehorned um, love triangle, and I agree. I think it's a good way to set up her character. But I think once that sort of comes to a conclusion quite naturally, she realizes there's no real connection there with him, and she just sort of cracks on with it. He leaves, and then that's tied off, and you get to see her as a character. And I think the fact that she had that resolution with Aragorn as the character makes her arc that much more compelling because it shows then her independence and her sort of drive to succeed beyond just being this damsel in distress, which is something that she's been talking about the entire series. So I think it's nice to sort of see that in action.
I do love the really classy way as well that Aragorn puts her in the friend zone. You know, I might have to start using this. Like, you know, it is but a shadow and a thought that you love. I cannot give you what you seek. It's just the classiest way of doing it.
It is the most Tolkien-esque "it's not you, it's me" I've ever heard in my entire life, but it's beautiful.
Yes, and again, another change from the book, which it just works between the two mediums. In the book, I believe that Eowyn goes under the name Dernhelm, disguises herself
Yeah,
as it's almost like the Mulan kind of thing, disguising
yeah,
herself as a male soldier, and then you get that reveal in the book. You can't do that in a film. There is
no,
no way. There is no amount of fake beards and camera trickery that you could do to pass that off, or gruff voice, or whatever you've got to
yeah,
do with it. There is a scene though in the extended edition that doesn't really make much sense. You know, like the bit where Theoden's delivering his speech and Eowyn kind of turns away like she doesn't want to reveal her identity. She's scared that her
yeah,
uncle might see her in the ranks. There's a scene where she's talking to Merry, and it's a wonderful scene. And like Merry's saying, like, if I was a man of Rohan, but I'm not, I'm a hobbit. And she's just standing out there in the open without her helmet on, with all the Rohirrim around her.
yeah,
Anyone could see her. So that doesn't really make sense that
yeah.
she's trying to conceal her identity, but it's a wonderful scene nonetheless.
I
Um,
mean, I
yeah.
think that's one of the often most overlooked parts of the film is that relationship between Merry and Eowyn, because I think it's such a wonderful parallel. Again, we talk about this already. The parallels between different characters is so prevalent in Lord of the
Mm-hmm.
Rings, especially in Return of the King. But that idea of these two people who so desperately want to be warriors, being forced to sort of stay behind and wait, and I think obviously then the resolution of that, the end of their arc being the fact that they're the ones who take down the Witch King, is spoilers, is such a great resolution to that arc. The fact that those are the only two that could do it because they're the only two people on that entire battlefield that are not men, because one's a hobbit and one's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I think that's such a great way to show that like the contributions that others can make during war. And I don't know if that's Tolkien tapping into his sort of his own history and war and the idea of like the war on the home front and the rest of it and all that. But I think it's such a wonderful way to sort of highlight that contribution. And again, that relationship is so wonderful. Obviously, with Merry being so excited to have his own sword, and this little like playful banter that the two of them have, and that will tie to her scooping him up as they ride off to battle. It's wonderful. Interesting point about the fake beards as well is the fact that I was reading a thing about like how
Uh-huh.
long it took them to decide on the helmet, because they shot that scene so many times in so many different helmets for Eowyn.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay, no, I
yeah,
didn't know
because
that.
they
Yeah.
couldn't decide what to use, because they had to find a helmet that was like that we the audience could clearly see that it was Eowyn, but that could plausibly not be seen by anyone around her.
Mm-hmm.
So to find that because that's a razor thin sort of margin. So they shot that scene apparently like hundreds of different times with different helmets of like to
Wow.
try and see exactly which one looked the best and which one was the right
Mm.
one. So apparently her costume design was one of the hardest part. I think it was an interview with one
mad,
of
yeah.
the guys, and like her costume design for that point was one of the hardest ones they had to do in the entire series because
And
to
of course,
find
the
that.
helmet's got a look of the nation of Rohan,
Yeah,
hasn't it? It
exactly. Yeah,
can't
so it's
stand
got
out
a.
too much as this weird.
And
Yeah,
I've got to say they nailed it. I think
yeah,
they
oh,
did a
yeah.
great. They did a great job, but like, yeah, that was apparently a very challenging sort of
See, I
thing.
thought you were going the whole like beards and everything, fake beards. I thought you were going to go that a lot of the Rohirrim that you see in the
Oh
background
yeah,
were female riders and had to wear
this
fake
is true.
beards,
Yes,
mainly.
that's a very good point. Yeah,
Every time.
yeah, it's true. It works.
But
That's it. Horse girls save Middle Earth. So anytime you start like bashing on horse girls, remember that they saved Middle Earth.
yeah,
So
absolutely, yes, they did. What was I going to say about anyone? Oh yeah, this is more of a book criticism, and obviously it kind of translates into the film. I really don't like how Tolkien kind of writes Eowyn at the end. You know, she goes through this, I am no man, wonderful, kills the Witch King, fulfills the
yeah,
prophecy.
but
And then,
Faramir though,
yeah, and then she just
yeah,
kind of becomes like a good wife, a good doting wife. She's like,
yeah.
I'm going to put that life behind me.
I mean, it's the same criticism that many people have of Lord of the Rings, that the female characters are broadly non-existent.
Mhm.
There are 3 prominent female characters, and none of them have particularly interesting arcs. Galadriel's cool, but she's in it for like a scene, and that's about it. Arwen has a reasonable arc. She has like a nice sort of personal development arc. I think that's expanded on a lot more in the films than it is in the
Mhm.
books. And then Eowyn's arc is really good until it shoots itself in their face right at the end.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
maybe
I
you could
think
argue that she's seen enough of war. She doesn't want to go down that life again,
yeah,
but it does feel like a betrayal of the character. It
yeah.
does feel like a complete 180, and that point in the book, I don't think it's justified. That's more of a book criticism, and obviously you're adapting that. I do like
I'd
in the.
argue, to me at least, it feels worse in the films
Do
because
you
at least in the
think?
books,
Yeah.
because in the books at least they have screen time together. You have this sort of like well, page time together, I suppose. But you have this sort of like time between Eowyn and Faramir and like the halls of the healing or whatever it's called, and they
Mhm.
have the sort of then they realize the connection the two of them have. Whereas in the film, it absolutely looks like she got rejected by Aragorn and then goes for slightly worse Aragorn
It's basically what
in
she
the
does in
form
the
of
book as
Faramir.
well, though. Honestly, like I
Yeah, I
think
feel I at least, but it seems a bit more
I think it's
natural
worse.
in
Like Faramir propositions are in the book, right? If I remember this, I'm
something like
paraphrasing,
that. Yeah,
obviously. Propositions are, and she goes like, "No, not interested. My heart belongs to another." I think it comes to her a second time, and she's like, I love another, and I'd look upon you, and I'm emotionally unavailable, kind of
yeah,
thing." And he's just being a simp for Ayo. He just keeps coming
yeah.
back. He comes back a third time, and she's like, "Oh, all right, then I suppose so." Like it feels. I feel
But,
so bad for Faramir in the book. It's like, oh my
I
god,
mean, I
dude, give up,
guess
find someone else who actually wants you.
I don't know, but like it strikes me more as like at least there's this interaction there. Like in the films, you just get a shot of the two of them like holding hands and like, yep, we fell in love off screen. So
They
what are you gonna
do
do?
add more in the extended edition. There is a
Yeah,
scene
but
where they added like a dialogue scene between them, which is
very
fine.
yeah, it's very little though. It's very minimal.
It's
But yeah,
something. It's
yeah.
something at least. And then they look at each other in the coronation. I do actually believe though there is a picture release of David Wenham and Miranda Otto in costume. So they must have shot a wedding scene between the two of them. Because they're in like different clothes
Yeah.
than what they are at the very end, and I just know there's so many deleted scenes out there that I would
Yeah.
absolutely love to see. But going to the Rohan stuff, I mean, King Theoden, oh my god, okay,
Oh, what a
the
guy.
ultimate redemption. Yeah, he's incredible in this, absolutely wonderful. That speech, I was going to ask you actually, do you prefer King Theoden's speech at the Battle of Pelennor Fields or Aragorn's speech at the Black Gate? Because both are
It
wonderful, but I do
both are
have a
wonderful.
favorite.
I mean, yeah, as do I. As I've mentioned many times already on this podcast, Rohan is my favorite part
Yeah,
of Lord of the Rings,
yeah,
and will be till the day that I die. So it's got to be my boy Theoden because like
yeah.
that speech. I remember like when I read through the Charge of the Rohirrim in the books, which by the way is easily my favorite section in the book. That one
Mhm.
little paragraph, not paragraph, that one little sort of section um of Gandalf fighting the Witch King on Minas Tirith that leads directly into the Charge of the Rohirrim.
Yeah.
Like that is stunning prose. Like say what you will about Tolkien's prose, that section it feels like you're reading like a mythic. I'd pull it up if I could, but like it's like a mythic odyssey because of the way that he tells the battle between Gandalf and the Witch King, and sort of like it feels so surrealistic and dreamlike, and then you have this crashing reality with the charge of the Rohirrim, which leads straight to Theoden's speech, and it's just it's absolutely magnificent. And the film does it brilliantly as well. That when they blow the horn, and you know that Rohan's here, and the music starts to come, and you see like them just lining up. Theoden runs down with the sword along the spears, and it's so good. Which
Honestly,
again,
yeah, he's like,
another
yeah.
improvised moment as well. Again, obviously, I'm sure you're aware
Oh well,
that he,
no.
yeah. So he
What
wasn't
they?
meant to do the thing where he like bashes the thing that was entirely the actor's
Oh, that's
decision.
awesome.
Yeah, brilliant,
Oh,
right?
that's so cool. So cool. I
Yeah,
never would have guessed in a million years that was
exactly,
improvised.
because it's such a crucial part of it.
Yeah.
Basically, from what I got, I believe it wasn't like an improvisation, but it was something that came from the actor. He said, I believe that
Mhm.
like he wanted something to bring them together, if that makes sense, something to
Yeah.
show that like this is it, this is the charge, and that's what he came up with, and that's what they used, and it was again, it's stunning.
The structure
Um,
in the book of that moment is frustrating to me because you do get the again much better in the book. I think is the confrontation between Gandalf and the
yeah,
Witch King. I like that they included a scene in the extended edition where they do at least reference that, but the
yeah,
Witch King destroying Gandalf's staff and
yeah, that's
overpowering would
weird.
never happen. And I
Yeah,
like that it was almost sort of like the Black Knight and the White Knight coming together on the chessboard,
yeah,
and there's that stalemate between the two, and it's about to throw down, but then events happen and it draws
yeah,
from
yeah.
elsewhere. But then in the book, I think it says like a horn blew and a cock
Yeah,
crowed or
it's like
something,
Rohan was here or
and
something
it's
like
like,
that. I'm
yeah.
like, yes.
And then the next chapter is Gon Burigan and the Woses, and again cut out of the film. I'm glad that they cut them out. I
Yeah, yeah,
think
that's
people
fair.
would have been more perplexed. It's kind of like these almost Native American esque kind of characters that
Yeah,
come out of the woods. They know the land, and they kind of talk in pidgin English a little bit in the
yeah.
book, and I don't think that would have worked for the film
No,
at
no,
all,
and
especially
I get
not at
that.
that point.
No, I don't. I think to me, I don't think there's going to ever be a better like. I can't think of any moment I've been more hyped for than the charge of the Rohirrim. Like there are some moments there that are special to me. Like again, with, like the Marvel series, you have like the portals moment, the one cry the portals. That's a great moment, but like it's just not the charge of the Rohirrim. It's
The
just
greatest
so.
scene for me in cinema history is the Charge
It's
of the Rohirrim.
yeah.
It's
I cannot think of anything better than that. It's just absolutely perfect. Like every part of it, just from like the way they use the music, the way the orcs react, and the sort of like the historical parallels. I cannot remember for the life of me, and it's going to haunt me for the rest of my days. Um, what it's referencing, but there's a famous moment in
cavalry charge or
historic.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a famous cavalry charge by Venetian knights, and I can't remember what it's called at all. But it's like it's basically the Charge of the Rohirrim is the closest we will ever get to that scene in like real life. So it's based on facts, and obviously Tolkien, being the
Mhm.
gigantic nerd that he was, knew this, and so much of this is like pulled from reality, and it all comes together. And honestly, yeah, it's so good.
I still get, it sounds really cliche, but genuinely, I still get goosebumps every single
Yeah,
time that I watch it. And if you
I,
can watch it in a cinema environment as well, it's wonderful. When I did my extended edition marathon at the Prince Charles Cinema a number of years ago now, that was a long sit. It was such a long sit.
yeah,
And I'm not going to lie, I think I fell asleep around the time that Elrond showed up to deliver the sword to
yeah,
Aragorn.
that's fair.
But guess what? I awoke. I sleepily awoke to the sound of Rohirrim trumpets.
Yeah,
And I woke up just in time as this scene was happening. I caught it from the very beginning of the scene, and I found my second wind, and I was back in it, and I watched it
yeah,
through to the end.
it's
It's just the camera angles, the pacing, the music. Oh my god! When
every part of it, the
that
music,
is
and
the
again, there's
ultimate
that.
culmination of that Rohirrim theme. It's played in full statement, and
Yeah.
when they you've got the ambient sounds. Oh my! I can't.
You have the sound of
Everything,
like the hooves hitting, and you see like the orcs start
everything.
to shake, and they start to break, and then just the collision. It's
Yeah,
just so good.
it's the greatest scene I've ever. There's a lot of great scenes in film
Yeah.
history to me, but if you ask me to pick my favorite one of any film ever, it would be this one,
Do you
hands
think it's the
down.
best scene in film history? No, because like I'm a sucker for dialogue, and like there are so many more scenes there
Okay,
that have so
yeah.
much more understated and subtlety. If you ask my favorite scene in history, it just absolutely is,
Oh,
because
it
there
gets you
is
amped like every
yeah
time. Like my
there
god.
is no part of that scene that I can criticize. There is no part of it that isn't just inherently in some way epic. I don't mean that in like the modern day slang version of that word. I mean in like the old English epic. It is epic. It is this sort of
Mhm.
final confrontation, this sort of sweeping orchestra sound. It is something out of epics, out of mythology, and it's just absolutely brilliant.
And it is one thing that I don't want to harp on the Hobbit trilogy because there was a
Yeah.
whole different kettle of fish going on with Hobbit films. But when I see the direction of this scene and how it was put together, and clearly it was storyboarded. They storyboarded everything. We haven't even talked about the Oliphant charge, but like the way that the action's choreographed and everything,
Yeah.
it's just absolutely wonderful. That when you get to the likes of the Battle of the Five Armies,
Yeah,
it
it's
doesn't even
just
feel like the same director
no.
not even remotely. There isn't an ounce of pathos, of emotion that you
No.
get from this one small scene of this this battle speech. There's
Yep.
nothing like that in the Hobbit films. And yeah, again, I don't want to go into it too much, but it does feel night and day with the direction in
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
But talking about the Mumakil, what a wonderful reveal as well.
Oh yeah, I love
Make
that.
safe the city, and then that look of horror as the face drops and you
Yeah.
see these things in the distance. Even now, I think the CGI absolutely holds
Yeah,
up.
it
It's
really holds
absolutely
up.
wonderful.
Yeah.
It's incredible the stuff they were able to do, let alone in 2003.
Yeah.
With all of these
I
films
that
filmed back to back as well. It's just
there are some films out there now that don't even have an ounce of the CGI capabilities that film did back then.
yeah.
And I think again, it's a wonderful example. Again, I think it's that horror director sort of skill showing of like what they didn't show. So that a lot of what we see of the Mumakil is just their legs, and they're quite easy to do because they're big grey cylinders.
Mhm.
You know, what I mean, they're not that in depth, and but I love that because as well as making it a lot easier for them to do the CGI for it, it also just really emphasizes that sense of scale. So obviously, we go into this film, we know what elephants are. I hope
Mhm.
most of us know it. Most of us have seen an elephant, so we expect when you see the Mumakil in like Two Towers, the scale isn't as obvious. They look like elephants. Like, elephants are big. These are elephants, cool, right? And then you see them again in Return of the King. And you're like, oh, these are bigger than elephants. These
So,
are
yeah.
real. These are real big.
Yeah.
And especially when you see the charge of the Rohirrim as well. I love that scene of like the riders going in and like cutting the legs of the Mumakil and like seeing that like because horses are big. I think people often forget how big horses are, but horses are pretty big. And then seeing like how diminutive they are compared to the scale of these
Mhm.
Mumakil, I think it really just I love that. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, and it's there's sort of like segments, those set pieces almost. It's like Peter Jackson goes, right, we're gonna have Aemir throw a spear into the guy who's
Yeah,
piloting the Mumakil, and it's gonna hang like an earring from one and it's gonna crash into another. And it is over the top, but it's
yeah,
wonderful. I'd never seen an action scene like that before. And
no,
even I'd argue since as well, like
no,
what
yeah,
this film did for visual effects for action scenes, the capability, the scope and scale of everything like that. And I'd be down for seeing another adaptation of the Lord of the Rings, preferably in TV form. You're never going to top the
yeah,
films, in my opinion. But if you wanted to make one that was close to the book, that's absolutely fine. But
yeah,
one thing that it definitely wouldn't have is the scale of the battles
no,
and the scope of what
never.
these films achieved with it. And especially testament to that is the Battle of Pelennor Fields, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like everyone harps on about Battle of Helm's Deep, and rightly so. It is the superior battle in my opinion, and that's
Yeah.
because the scale is reduced. You know, that makes sense because it's such a tighter experience. I keep linking links back to the Marvel universe, but it's the reason I prefer Infinity War to Endgame because the scale is that much tighter, the focus is that much tighter. It's the
The
same
build
with
up as well
yeah,
before it, I think, is yeah.
it's we talked about that as well. Yeah, the fact that like the tension is so palpable, which I think in Pelennor feels because the story now is branching out in even more directions.
Mhm.
It's harder to build that tension. That being said, these are two completely different battles. Like they are two and completely different scales, completely different styles of battle. One's a siege, one's like open warfare, and all the rest of it. And both of them are just done so magnificently.
Mhm.
And I think that Pelennor Fields often does get the short end of the stick there despite the fact it is still one of the greatest battle scenes in any film
Yeah.
ever. And the set pieces, like you say, are just brilliant. There are so many. There are so many that are like playing in my mind now as I
Mhm.
go through this. These little moments, like 5 to 10 seconds long, of these little skirmishes that are still, to me at least, so iconic today. That's not even talking about obviously like some of the bigger scenes, like the whole confrontation with the Rich King and the death of Theoden and Eowyn and all the rest of it. Like that's one thing actually I'd like to talk about very, very briefly. I know we're already massively running behind schedule with this,
It's
but
fine. It's fine.
I think like considering the Witch King, I know he's technically in the first two films, but he's not really, not in any sort of meaningful capacity. They
He
made him
stabs
such a
Frodo.
Yeah, but
That's
like, well, whatever. I could stab Frodo.
is it meant to
Um,
be the Witch King at Osgiliath as well? I don't know if that's ever explicitly
I don't know. That's my point, though,
said.
right?
Yeah,
He's not. He's just a ring wraith. He's just the leader of the ring race and whatever. The ring race is cool. Don't get me wrong. I love the ring
they all
race,
look
but
alike.
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
going to be
Yeah,
racist to the ring race. They all look
yeah.
alike.
I think people will forgive you on that one, Chris. But I love how they make him such a threatening like person. It makes him feel so much more real. And don't get me wrong, part of that is the costuming, like the Witch King helmet and like the flail, and it's
Mm,
awesome. It's so cool. Like because something we've seen of like the ring wraiths is that like the way they move is really ethereal. Like obviously you have the fact that they like, glide across when they stab Frodo and stuff like that. Like they don't move normally. They're not fast, but they're not. But they feel agile, if that
mm,
makes sense. But when you bring in the Witch King in Return of the King, and he's not agile at all. He's this hulking, invincible zombie, and I love that. It's so cool. Just this guy just walking, just dragging this flail across the thing, and just like the weight behind each swing is wonderful. I think just from the physicality, and again, it's the same stunt actor I believe that played Lurtz in
yeah,
Fellowship, and
it's
again, like
Gothmog in this as well, doesn't
yeah,
he?
exactly.
The
Honestly, it's a
pig face
credit to
talk. Yeah.
I need to learn his name because a credit to you, mate. Like the stunt work in that film is so good. Like the way he's able to tell, or the way he's able to feel so menacing just from walking is absolutely brilliant. And I love the setup for the Witch King and how they make him feel so impossible to beat. And obviously, you have all the mythology. It's one of the reasons I do like the scene between him and Gandalf in the extended cut because you get to see that Gandalf, basically a lesser god, can't beat the Witch King. You're like, oh, Gandalf can't beat him. Sure, okay.
Hmm.
What are we going to do here then? Because we've got nobody better at doing this than Gandalf. And then obviously the payoff with Eowyn and Merry is just brilliant.
Hmm. And just I haven't talked about the video game as well for this game, but what was wonderful is playing the game. I think before the film came out, I seem to remember playing the game and seeing segments. No, sorry, the film had come out. Playing the game afterwards and going, wait, this scene wasn't in the film and everything like that. And one of the big things talking about the Witch King was the design of the Witch King was wildly different in the video game. And I think John Howe, one of the conceptual designers, came up with a design for the Witch King, which you can find on Google if you type it in John Howe or Alan Lee. I forget which one it was. I'm pretty sure it was John Howe. Original Witch King design. I think they filmed it and everything. It's like this more of a spiked, like vertically spiked helmet that looks like his crown when he's in his wraith
Yeah.
form. He had a mace. He didn't have a morning star, as it's described in the book. He had a mace, and they gave him a mace. And you see this in the video game. You play the level on the video game, and you fight the Witch King, and you can see the original design. So I don't know how much of a last-minute decision it was to change the design between the development of the game to when the film came out. But either way, he's still imposing and it's incredible.
Yeah.
There is a line of dialogue that does make me laugh, and I never even kind of drew reference to it at any point until I read a comment on YouTube, as it starts many times now. And I read the comment, I was like, I can't get this out of my head now. And it's when Gandalf's talking to Pippin, and he says, Sauron has yet to reveal his most deadly servant, the one that they say no living man can kill, the Witch King of Angmar. You've met him before. He stabbed Frodo at Weathertop. I'm like, oh, so Sauron did reveal his most deadliest servant then, because he stabbed Frodo on Weathertop. Like, I get the
You know what
context
he
of the line.
means though. He means
Yeah,
in this battle he hasn't sat up the
exactly,
Witch King,
exactly. It's a little
Chris.
bit clunky though now when I hear it, but that comment just stuck out in my
But I
mind.
love that because I believe that's overcut over like the suit up scene of
Yeah, it
the
is.
Witch King,
Yeah,
of
it's
him just
so
being like
cool.
decked out, which I love because it's such a weird scene. It's like Darth Vader putting on his helmet. I love it.
There's
It's
some
like just
really
like
cool suiting up scenes in the Lord of the Rings, between Aragorn getting
yeah,
suited up for Helm's Deep, and then the Witch King in this one, the close up of the gauntlet and
yeah.
like the
Just
spikes on the
the
thing
thing is
kind of
though, right?
unfurl.
Because obviously, like you got the Witch King getting suited up. Why is he getting suited up? He's invincible. Why does he need armor?
Because it looks cool. It
Yeah,
looks cool, damn it.
that
That's
is
it.
the only reason. Like, it's because he wants to intimidate his foes. Or whatever. He puts it on because he knows that it looks cool. So what we
Mhm.
can draw from this, Chris, is that the Witch King of Angmar is really into high fashion.
He's like, I'm a king, damn it! Like, I want a
Yeah, I
crown.
would look fabulous.
Oh wait, no, they were all kings. They're all kings of
That's
men.
true. Yeah, that's
But
true.
he is the Witch
But
King.
he's
He
the
is the
king
king
of
of kings.
kings.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Oh, what else was I
That's
say?
my hot take from Return of the King.
That's
The Witch King wanted to look fabulous for
he's
the Battle of
fabulous,
Pelennor
damn it.
Fields. Yeah.
Oh god. Now I want to hear the Witch King with that voice. That would be amazing. But you talked about sort of the battles being sort of like distinctly different, and that is a big thing I want to talk about if we sort of like move to Gandalf and Pippin's storyline now, get into Minas Tirith, is that you have another kind of fortress, another siege, will hold up there. It's like, how do we make this distinctly different to Helm's Deep? I even think the location that they filmed it on is the exact same location that they
I
did
believe
film
so, yeah.
Helm's Deep. So, but it's so wildly different, the trebuchets, Grond, the door and everything. It just feels so much more epic, and the location of Minas Tirith as well. We've talked about conceptual design. That the whole when the Gondor theme's kicking in, and you've got Gandalf initially riding up level upon level upon level, and you get this real sense of geography and what this city looks like, and the grandeur of it, and the scale of it as well. It's such a wonderful sequence, and it's just a great place to host a battle as well. And I think Peter Jackson really makes the most of everything, from the catapulting the severed heads as well of the people in the previous battle, and then catapulting literal ruins of their own city back at the enemy. It's
so
wonderful.
good. Like I love like the parallels that you can draw between Gondor and Rohan for obvious reasons. I love like the cleanliness almost of like Minas Tirith, of like the white walls and this polished like silver armor and all the rest of it,
but a sense of decay to it nonetheless.
Exactly, because I mean, especially like later on throughout the film, you get this sense of like the entire city is meant to be this bastion of humankind. Gondor is best to be like the king of all men. They're the big group of men. Like Rohan's out there in the wilds doing what they do, but Gondor's like that's what Sauron wants to destroy because that's the heart of civilization. That's the heart of men. You see this like, obviously later on with Aragorn basically reclaiming it and the rest of it. But then as you go through the city, you see the sort of like the poverty and the sort of the brutalism almost of like the Gondorian guards and the rest of it. And you've seen this before, obviously, with the Rangers of Osgiliath. The Rangers that Faramir leads, and seeing like all of this sense of like the crumbling ruins of civilization. It feels like the fall of Rome, like sort of like the city is decaying from within. This once bright bastion of culture is now a shell of its former self. And that lead up, obviously, then to sort of the introduction to Denethor and his relationship with Faramir and Pippin and Gandalf and all the rest of it is just so wonderful. I think, like, in terms of like the character moments, I think there's other than perhaps Frodo and Sam and Gollum, like Pippin, Gandalf, Denethor, Faramir, that little quartet there is the highlight of this film for me. There are so many wonderful little interactions that I could point to that are just absolutely marvelous.
I love the journey that Pippin goes on in this film as well. From the very night, even at the beginning of the film, he's still very naive. I love that scene where Merry and him part, and he says, "We'll see each other soon." And Merry's like, "I don't know what's going to happen," and he's like fighting back tears, and we're fighting back tears.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he gets to Minas Tirith, and he understands that Denethor is Boromir's father, and witnessing what happened to Boromir, Pippin really steps up. And there are still some naive moments that creep in when he's like, I suppose all this is for ceremonial position. He doesn't expect me to fight, does he? So there is still that naive quality to him there. And when the column of light goes up, I want to say as well, I don't know if Return of the King was the first film that did this, but I don't know if Return of the King was the first film that inspired that trope of like a giant column of light going into I feel like every blockbuster film now, whenever something evil shows up, there's always like a column of light. It's in like every Transformers film. It was in the new Ghostbusters film. It's in Man of Steel. It's in Watchmen. It's in so many films now. It's ridiculous. And this is the first film that sticks out in my mind as using it. I know it's from the book.
Obviously,
but Pippin, when he shows up to the battle, they called us out to fight, and he saves Gandalf as well. That's a massive moment. I love the arc that and the growth that Pippin's character goes on from the guy who just did everything wrong that could go wrong in Fellowship of the Ring to he's basically a warrior. He's a hobbit.
And I love the fact that they show that he's not a warrior as well, if that makes sense. Like I love the fact they show that he is still incompetent, but that doesn't mean that he's worthless, if that makes sense.
Lights the beacons as well. Like
exactly.
So
like
much.
He does so many things in those films, and the point is that, like, despite how ridiculously stacked the odds are against him, he'll get up and he'll fight and he'll do the right thing because at heart he is a good person, and it's your actions, not your intentions, really, that sort of, or maybe your intentions and not your actions, really, that sort of really determine what you are. I love that little conversation that him and Gandalf have about like the idea of death, which I was amazed again to find out isn't from the books. That's a conversation entirely unique to the films. That conversation of sort of like coming to peace with the idea of death, and then that they break through the gate and they fight, and it's just these wonderful little moments that really show sort of like the character of these characters. They show like their resilience and their unending sort of loyalty and bravery in the face of these just horrific things that they have to endure. I love that. I think that's shown so well through all of the whole Minas Tirith and Gondor section.
That's one of my favorite scenes that you mentioned there is Gandalf sort of talking about death with Pippin. Sounds like a cheery conversation, doesn't it? But he does sort of like inspire that hope in him, that sort of like last ditch effort. And I love how in the soundtrack you get Into the West creeping through as well. And then you obviously get it full in the end credits as well. Always plays around the Grey Haven sailing into the west kind of sections of the film, which and just that playing there just really tips it off for me. And it is Tolkien's language, you know, when he says the grain ray curtain of this world rolls back and all turns to silver glass. That is from I think it's like one of the final pages of the book is where it describes the scene of Frodo sailing into the west. So I love how they worked in Tolkien's lines there, even if the scene itself isn't directly from the book. And we were talking about John Noble as well before we recorded this thing, because he is easily one of the best actors in this film. I mean, all the actors are wonderful, but his character is just so complex. I think he's more complex in the book, and you know, I have seen people say that for the film he's demonized a lot more. He's a bit more sort of morally grey and a bit more tragic in the book, whereas in this one he's very much vilified, I think.
Definitely.
And it's only in the book, I think it's more explicitly stated as to why he has ended up in that way. They have a Palantir in Minas Tirith, and he's been in direct communication with Sauron, similar to Saruman in many ways, I guess, in that regard. And over time, it's corrupted him, and Sauron's probably filtered in all of the negativity and the hopelessness and whatever into Denethor. And there's a line in the extended edition which kind of hints at that, where he says, do you think the eyes of the White Tower are blind? I've seen more than you know. I think that's in the extended edition. You don't explicitly see a Palantir, but at least it's referenced that perhaps that could be a reason. But I just love the parallels between Theoden. You know, as I mentioned earlier, they very much come from the same place. Theoden himself, you know, when he was possessed by Saruman in the film, is very much kind of the same character that Denethor is at this point in the film. And you know, the whole almost Shakespearean relationship he has with Faramir, his son, as well. That really hard hitting line. It's like, you wish that our places had been exchanged, that I had died and Boromir had lived. Yes, I wish that.
It's just brutal.
Like, that's, you know, it's incredible stuff.
It's so well delivered because it's so offhand the way that he does. He's like, I do.
Sips his wine or eats his food or whatever.
Eats his, like, chicken or whatever it is. We'll get on to him eating food because obviously that has to be discussed. But I was going to say, in the idea that, like, I think that he's vilified in the film, that's absolutely true. But I actually think I prefer that interpretation of it, at least in sort of the reasonings behind it. So you said, obviously, like in the books, it's discussed the other Palantir and he's been corrupted by Sauron. I much prefer the interpretation of this is a man driven mad by grief. I think that's far more interesting. And it's the stuff we talked about again with Faramir being vilified in the books. I think it's just more interesting to have these characters that are a little bit more human in that respect. Like, it's not about like the magic of the world. It's the fact that this man has been forced to sit in a position he never should have had, to fight a war he had no chances of winning, and has just seen his people, everyone he's known, just slowly destroyed over time, and finally has suffered the loss of his son, someone who thought he was like the next generation, the beacon of Gondor, the greatest Gondorian ever to have lived, and all the rest of it. And I'm seeing him sort of crumble into this shell of what potentially could have been a very, very talented steward is sad, and I think it's much more interesting than the idea that he's just corrupted because Sauron's made him use magic on him or whatever. Like, I think it's way more interesting to see this much more self-destructive kind of energy that you get from Denethor, and I think that plays a lot more into sort of the madness of Denethor later on, obviously with the wine, the oils, and the funeral pyres and the rest of it, because that's not really explained in the books, in my opinion. I don't think the fact that obviously Denethor is like inadvertently betraying Gondor, very much so because of all the corruption of Sauron. But I think the fact that he is so grief-stricken that he just simply doesn't want to live anymore despite everything, I think that's much better handled in the film because that's his entire characterization. Don't get me wrong, it's simpler. I agree, he's a much less complex character, but I think because of that focus on that one aspect of his character, I think it's a much more interesting portrayal.
I think all the parts of his character from the film are all there from the book. Absolutely, like I don't think anything comes particularly out of left field with anything to do with his character. I did want to ask you though, where they bring Faramir's body back to Minas Tirith, and he's like, "My line has ended," and he's going off on one. Do you think he knew that Faramir was alive and he was just like, no, he's not. Burn him. No, he's dead. I don't want anything to do with Faramir. Or do you think he was just so far gone that he genuinely, despite everyone saying that he wasn't, that his son was dead?
I believe that he thought his son was dead. I think he was just so far off the deep end here that he was just like, I think the shock of that, or not necessarily the shock, like the realization of what he's done made him just resort to that sort of final desperate conclusion. I think that ties into the fact that he just gave up effectively. I think a big part of that to me is the fact that he knew that it was his fault because he's the one who sent Faramir off to take Osgiliath. He's the one who put him on that path that led to his death. And I don't think anyone could have pulled him out of that. So no, I think he genuinely believed Faramir was dead.
And there's some great sets as well. Like I love the Hall of the Stewards as well. And just the echo of the empty room when Gandalf and Pippin are walking through it. You've got all these statues, like these monolithic effigies of all the previous kings of Gondor and everything. I think it's just brilliant. And the stewards, sorry.
Yeah, and the panning over to this shrunken old man just sitting up, like dressed in complete black in this hall of white, I think is such a striking visual.
And he is a pitiable character. There are some scenes where there is like a shred of sympathy you have for him. The bit, as you mentioned, when he's introduced and he's clutching the cloven in two horn of Gondor. Perhaps you've come to tell me why my son is dead. There's the bit as well, which I think it's in the extended edition, where he kind of chastises Faramir, and then he kind of comes around and he almost like welcomes him with open arms, but then you see that he's seeing a vision of Boromir.
Yeah, I love that scene.
Doesn't he he like falls back, doesn't he? And kind of like an old
then
man,
his face just completely changed. Again, such brilliant acting from John Noble of because his face was like, oh, my son, and he's just like, yeah.
But then he does some things that are just absolutely unforgivable in this film. And you're just like, oh, fuck this guy. And this kind of leads me on to
the way he eats a tomato.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. Because that is unforgivable.
Oh. The exploding tomato. There's like a little mini hand grenade in that tomato.
It's one of the most. I have seen some weird horror films and I've seen some disgusting things in my time. Nothing I don't think has ever struck me with more like genuine disgust than the way that he eats that chicken and tomatoes. That scene to me is absolutely brilliant. I've interrupted you, and we'll come back to the scene in a minute because it needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying?
It's like Denethor does ASMR, isn't it? When he's like biting into all these foods into like, am I correct? The sounds. Oh yeah. But in terms of him being vilified and him being almost irredeemable, well, very much irredeemable with his treatment of Faramir and the men of Gondor and everything. The one scene that I'm not keen on, it gets a good reaction and it works filmically for that moment, and it is like a catharsis for the audience, and it gets us geared up for the battle. But it is probably the most un-Tolkien scene out of the entire film, and I can't bring myself to like it. It's where he goes like, "Abandon your posts, flee for your lives." And then Gandalf swats him with the staff about 2 or 3 times, and he's like, oh, it's like really slapsticky and ridiculous and over the top. And no steward, no sort of like captain of the guard or anyone is stepping in like, you've just assaulted our steward, like under pain of death, as treason or whatever. It works for the film because, you get this like, prepare for battle, and we're into it. And we're like, yes, get rid of Denethor. Let's get something moving, Gandalf. But it is so un-Tolkien.
Yeah.
Like, I think you could have got that across with like a disapproving expression of Gandalf's face and then cut to him getting everyone ready. I didn't really need to see Gandalf go like full karate master with a staff,
I love that scene. I'm not gonna lie, I adore that scene.
No, it works for the it just kind of
it's I completely agree. You're absolutely right. It's another one. To me, it's another Elves at Helm's Deep moment where like it's absolutely going against Tolkien's vision. It's not something Tolkien would ever put in, and I think it's actually something Tolkien would actively dislike. However, it's just kind of cool. I just like Gandalf use like because it's sort of like you get to see it later as well. Like Gandalf just spinning the staff around, using
Yeah.
the sword and the staff to just take down 30 guys. I love that. I love seeing warrior
It's very
Gandalf.
video game. It like, and you can do
Yeah.
all those moves in the video game
Oh
as
yeah.
well, which is great. Get those combos. What was it, Balrog's Gambit or whatever? I love
Something
that
like
game.
that.
One of the best movie
Honestly,
tie-in
such a
games, by the
great
way.
game.
Return of the King.
Fantastic. Yeah, so good.
I don't know if you want to save it for greatest moments or greatest scenes, or do you want to talk about it now while we're
I
on
think
the whole Denethor thing?
I feel like we're doing a disservice to this section if we don't talk
Yeah.
about this scene because it's such a crucial aspect of the relationship between Denethor and Faramir,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is such a crucial element to this film because obviously you have this relationship with Boromir in the first film, and many people, I'm sure, like myself, don't appreciate the subtleties and the nuance of Boromir's character, and you don't really like Boromir, and you come here and you don't really like Faramir, and you don't really like his dad. Basically, the whole family line just kind of,
I think
they
Denethor
just
had the right idea. Just let them burn. Just
yeah, like they just kind
the
of had a
line's
bad
ended.
time. But then you get to see like, and this is more in the extended cut as well. But you get to see this relationship form between. You get to see why these characters were the way they are. You get to see why Boromir was the way he was in the Fellowship. You get to see why Faramir is the way he was in Two Towers, and then you finally have this sort of resolution. No, that's not the right word. But this relationship is brought to like the forefront between Faramir and Denethor, and you get to see the the conflicts between the father and the son, and this final sort of like this redemption for Faramir almost in the sense that he will do literally anything for his father. That's why he would take the ring, and he just wants to be acknowledged. And that all obviously culminates in the charge to retake Osgiliath, and it's just such a beautiful sequence. You have obviously the soldiers going down there, knowing full well they have a 0% chance of doing this, and you see like the wives and the mothers and daughters all like, laying flowers at their feet, and this sort of like knowing that they're sending their loved ones out there to die for no reason, just to satisfy the ego of a twisted old man, and it's so wonderful. And obviously all this then the final charge obviously is punctuated by Billy Boyd singing Edge of
Edge of
Night,
Night.
which is just so beautiful. It's one of
Oh
those songs I'll sing in
yes.
the shower every now and then and just like really try and hit those notes because it's just the way the delivery is so good. And then obviously you have the scene of Denethor just devouring this food. Like, come, sing me a song. It's such a. I've never hated. That's not true. I've hated more characters, but like it's one of the most hateable moments I think for any character ever. You just have Denethor, this rich old man, destroying that meal in a way that only John Noble could. I don't care. That is some fantastic acting, in my
Yes,
opinion.
yeah.
It's just absolutely brilliant because it's so perfect. And you get to see like how you get to see like this mournful side of Pippin, and like Pippin like coming to the conclusion that you say, coming to his own and realizing that he's chosen the wrong side by allying himself with Denethor and the rest of it. And all of this punctuated with the charge and like the orcs slowly drawing back their bows. That sound effect of like the bows being drawn
Mm-hmm.
is etched forever in my memory because it's just so perfect. And as the song finishes, just that the sound of the arrows flying, you don't get to see it, you just feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love that scene. I think it's so perfect. And the craziest thing to me is that it very, very nearly didn't happen. Because the only reason that Billy Boyd sings the song and has this entire scene based, well, obviously the charge would have happened, but the way that it was done the way it was, is because a week or two before they were going to do that scene, they went out drinking together, the cast and crew, and someone I can't remember her name or her role, but somebody in the crew, at any rate, was having a drink with Billy Boyd, and he started singing karaoke. And before that, Billy Boyd was adamant that he couldn't sing, and therefore couldn't sing this song and couldn't do this bit from the book, and they just have to do something else with it, and we'll see how it goes. But they did karaoke, and they saw that he lied, and they saw that he could sing, and so drunkenly he agreed to do it. Was then forced into it by the rest of the crew and Peter Jackson the next day, and then they restructured the scene. They built it just around this, and
That's
it's
amazing.
entirely just because they got drunk and did karaoke. And that's the only reason that we have that scene, and that is bizarre to me. There are so many of these little stories that you hear
Yeah.
from Lord of the Rings that I love, and that's one of my favorite ones.
God bless alcohol, right? This is,
Honestly,
without
yeah, it's
alcohol, this wouldn't have turned out the way it did. I
no,
think the whole Edge of Night sequence, I guess if you're going to bring a name to the sequence, I guess you call it the Edge of Night scene,
yeah,
right?
you would, yeah,
I think this is I mean, there are a lot of great scenes. There are a lot of perfectly edited scenes in this whole film. I think it's the best constructed
Yeah.
from beginning to end.
Absolutely.
It's almost like a short film in itself, like the story, a lot of visual storytelling as well, just by the shots that are going on. I love the pageantry of Gondor as well. You know,
Yeah.
it is very much this harkening back to a time of, you know, horsebound heroes and valor and honor and everything, and the women sort of meeting the men out as they go out to war, handing them flowers and everything. It's very sort of archetypal of traditional romantic heroes, essentially. But there is that undercurrent. You know, that's what Gondor was. That's what it always was. But now there is that undercurrent. You know, they're all going out to their deaths. That, you know, it very much feels like Gondor is in the winter of its years in many ways. And, you know, they're accepting the flowers. But, you know, you see Boromir's speech in the extended edition of Two Towers, like, this city has been reclaimed for Gondor, and they're all passing around ale. That's kind of what you expect. This isn't that. This is so far removed from that. This is a suicide mission. This isn't any kind of, you know, there is no point or purpose to this. And again, if you're going to draw World War One comparisons, you know, that they're all in this scene. Absolutely. You've got those sort of chateau generals sitting behind, drinking their wine, eating their food, sending young men out to their death. It's all there. And, you know, I know that Tolkien hates allegory and everything, but it is there very much.
Yeah, he can say that as much as he wants. If he hated allegory, he shouldn't have put so much of it into his books.
Exactly. But yeah, the song's perfect. There's a great cover as well, and for the life of me, I don't know what the YouTube channel is. But if you just type in "Edge of Night" cover, someone's done a full cover of the entire
I've
verses
heard it.
from
Yeah,
the book.
It's brilliant. Yeah,
same ambience, same feel as the Billy Boyd one.
Is that the one with it's like a flickering candle in the background? I like the video or something like that. If that's the one.
I think so. Yeah, it's got like bagpipes in there as well. It feels very Celtic.
Good. Yeah.
And yeah, the fact of, you know, the audio of like the bowstring being drawn back, but then also the lack of audio.
Yeah.
When you just hear Gothmog go like kind of thing, and then the sound kicks back in with the arrows. Cut to the close up of the blood.
Singing,
like the blood coming out of his mouth as he's eating his chicken. It's the symbolism in that scene. Everything is just
stunning. Everything about it. The timing of like all the little parts is just played to absolute perfection. Like one of the things that's most miraculous to me again is I'll keep harping on this. Billy Boyd was the one who came up with the tune for the song. Because obviously it's in a book and there is no music to do with it, and so they just said to him, "Sing it how you think it would be sung." And the fact that he was able to create something that to me is so hauntingly beautiful, like just we'll go with this, and then they then listened to that, and then framed an entire scene around it, and all of this was done fairly last minute because it wasn't originally going to be this way at all. And it comes out as such a perfect scene. It's such a testament to, I think, the filmmaking capabilities of the cast and crew here, because like it's ridiculous. It's not fair that much talent was placed into this film. It's just absurd, honestly.
I think it's funny as well because I think the song, I think it's actually in the Fellowship book, and it's a walking song. It's as they're like walking out of the Shire. I don't even think they get to like Crick Hollow or anything like that. I think it's Pippin, like that, Frodo, and Sam. It's a walking song. It's meant to be like this upbeat, and I'm like, this isn't an upbeat song. This is, you know, we have no songs for wars and evil times. But let me drop the mic right now on this song, Edge of Night.
Except for this one. This one I think is quite appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like the fact that you can feel how uncomfortable Pippin is doing it, and like you say, you actually do get the impression that that's not the way this song is meant to be sung. It's meant to be a bit more jaunty, but the way that Pippin's choosing to sing it just reflects the tone, and I love that.
And speaking of sort of like a downer tone, I guess if we want to move on to like Frodo, Sam, and Gollum now, this is like the heavy stuff of the film, isn't it? So I mentioned the intro, so I'm not going to sort of like harp on that again. Suffice it to say that I love the tone that it sets up for these characters. There is some added drama to the whole trio of the characters, which I guess you need to bring into for a film, and I could understand why they did it. They add in the whole dynamic of Gollum trying to corrupt Frodo's mind and turn against Sam and send Sam away. There's the whole framing him with the lambast bread stuff. None of that's in the book, and in fact, I think in the book, Sam actually goes into Shelob's cave with Frodo. That sounds like a euphemism, but I don't mean it to. But I think he's present there. But again, I can understand why they took Sam out of the equation, because it adds to the drama that Frodo is alone. He is totally isolated. He doesn't have Gollum. He doesn't have Sam. For once on the whole journey, He has no shoulder to cry on. He has no Sam as that support there, which I think adds to the tension of that Shelob scene a lot
If
more.
memory serves, I do believe Frodo goes into Shelob's lair by himself, but he doesn't send Sam away. I think he just leaves earlier, if that makes sense,
Right.
and heads off with
Yeah.
with Gollum. But it's more of a case that they get separated within the lair more than the case
Yeah,
of
that's it.
he actively betrays Sam in the way he does in the film. That being said, I really like that change in the film. I really like the sort of dynamic. Because I think it really adds to Gollum as a character, and I think it really shows the way that like it's playing tricks on Frodo's mind and all the rest of it, which I think is much more interesting than just they kind of get separated in Shelob's lair. Again, I know it's a bit of added character drama, but I think it's done really well. I think again some of the acting there is brilliant. Sean Astin obviously is so good. The scene when Frodo tells Sam to go home um, is brilliant. I love that little interaction. All three parts there are played to perfection. Sean Astin to me is particularly just like how genuinely devastated he is by this because like this is like a personal thing, but like everyone's been in that situation where they've been yelled at for something they didn't do. Like everyone's been in that situation. I've never been in that situation several hundreds of miles from home in enemy territory where I could die at the lair of a giant spider with the fate of the world resting on it. So I think it's fair to say that whatever we felt in those moments is a fraction of what Sam felt there. But we all know that emotion, that frustration of not being believed when you've done nothing wrong, and like how much he's suffered and how much he's put into this. And I think Sean Astin does that so much with so few words, just the facial expressions and just everything about the way he delivers it. It is so genuinely like raw and emotional. I think it's done brilliantly.
Yeah, I mean, his acting's tremendous in this one. We talked about that Fellowship was the only one of these films that had a supporting actor nomination with Ian McKellen. I think Sean Astin could have done with one from this film. I genuinely do. I mean, he's been brilliant in all of them, don't get me wrong, but certainly I think the character just has a lot more weight and drama to sort of like deal with in this one. What did I want to say about there was the point that I wanted to make about this, and then like the bit where he shows up to fight Shelob. I think him being away and coming back, you have dun 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 dun
it's such a good moment.
It's such a heroic moment, isn't it, with the light of
like he doesn't
Elendil
care that Frodo sent him home. He's there for Frodo, whether Frodo wants him or not, and he comes back in. It's so good. I love that.
Oh God, what else can we talk about the Frodo Sam thing? I mean, Shelob's great, it's creepy, it's disgusting, it's everything you want it to be.
You get to see a bit more of Peter Jackson's sort of moments as a horror director, as you get to see sort of
and Howard Shore with the score as well. You know, a lot of those strings that kick in, especially in that Shelob part as well.
The light of Elendil? Is that what it's called?
Eärendil, yeah. Read the Silmarillion, it's fantastic.
Yes.
The stuff about Eärendil, it's some of the best.
Yeah, I love again. You get to see that, and it scares off Shelob. You get those cool moments. You're like, oh, he's going to do it, and then obviously Shelob gets him in the back, and yeah, I love that.
That bit, that is like one of the biggest continuity errors for me in this film, because he's still wearing his mithril vest at that point, and in the book I think it Shelob stabs him in the neck, which is fine,
something like that, yeah.
But it like comes down and like stabs him in the stomach in this. I'm like, it wouldn't get through the mithril, he'd be fine, you know. He's been how many times does Frodo get stabbed across all of these films? Seems like he's always getting stabbed, but
he's had a bad time. I love the little I forget what the tower's called.
Cirith now,
yes, that's
where
the
he gets
one.
taken to. Yeah,
I love that little sequence as well. Again, you get to see Sam just going like Rambo. Basically.
That's my favorite level in the video game. You can cause so much carnage in that level, like killing all the orcs.
He has throw people off like ledges and things, and I love all those little moments. Yeah,
there's a bit in the video game where like they're all fighting in the center, and obviously when you play the game the first time, you just go and chop them all up. But if you leave them all, run around the outside and run up the staircase, you can cut a chandelier that comes crashing down, and just takes them all out, and gives you instant perfect mode. It's brilliant. Love that game. I'm gonna have to play that game again now.
Honestly, it's such a good game. Honestly,
one of my favorite scenes actually is at Cirith Ungol, and it's you know, you have the great moment with the silhouette, like
that's exactly
expecting this huge warrior, and then it's
Sam like, look at him, and then he still takes them out anyway. I love that. Yeah.
Annihilates them. It's when he gets back to Frodo and he holds out the ring, and the sound cuts out. You get that eerie, haunting kind of ring sound. And Sam looks like he's like hesitant to give Frodo the ring. Now, I've seen multiple ways of reading this. I'd go with the obvious one, that the ring's corrupting Sam and he doesn't want to let go of the ring. He's had possession of the ring. There's a great bit in the book as well that talks about that, and I actually think that they do adapt this in the animated one that came out in 1980, where for a moment, for a fleeting moment, Sam thinks of, he does go a bit power mad. He thinks like, I would turn the whole world into like a garden. There would be green everywhere, and plants and trees and foliage would consume the world. And he goes like an evil gardener overlord, which is brilliant. It's kind of nice and humble that, you know, he hasn't forgotten his roots, no pun intended, as a gardener. And that's what he would do if he was like an evil overlord of the world. But then he goes, but no, I'm not that kind of person. He hands the ring back. I always saw that the ring was corrupting him, but I've seen some people read it that when Frodo's like, give me the ring, Sam, he's hesitant to give it back to Frodo because he's worried of what it's doing to Frodo.
That's always been my interpretation of that scene, even as a child, because I guess probably wishful thinking more than anything, but like, Sam is the best of us. There is no better person in literature than Samwise Gamgee.
The ring is all corrupting though, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't care. It's Sam. Sam is Sam is special. And honestly, that's all it stems from for me. It's the fact that, like, I just genuinely don't believe that Sam could ever betray Frodo. I don't, again, because of everything you've seen him do, and I like that little moment because to me it's a case of, like, the way I always viewed it wasn't, he didn't want to keep the ring for himself. He wanted to keep the ring for Frodo. I think that's so fitting with Sam's character. To me, that's always been my interpretation of that scene, because he's worried and he can see what it does to Frodo, because obviously this is the first time they've seen each other since, in the films at least, since Frodo told Sam to leave, and they've had this big fallout, and Frodo's happy to see Sam, but the second he sees the ring, Sam's nothing to him anymore. He wants the ring back, and that's all he cares about. And I think to Sam it's a case of, like, he doesn't like what the ring's doing to Frodo, and he's considering sort of sharing the load, so to speak.
Show the load, the load, the
I love
load.
that scene.
You want to test out your surround sound speakers? Just put that scene on.
It's so good. But yeah, no, I love that. So I like that little sequence.
There is a scene at Cirith Ungol that I'm absolutely dying to see, and they are in the film. They are in the video game, actually. At the beginning of the Cirith Ungol level, they play more of a prominent role in the video game than they do in the actual film. And I watched the director's commentary of Return of the King, and Peter Jackson says he shot a scene. The footage out there exists. They put it in the film, that they thought it threw off the pacing. The doors to Cirith Ungol, there's these two statues called the Watchers, I think they're called.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like this triple-headed vulture statue, and they're almost like a siren, like a security feature, I guess, of Cirith Ungol. And if you feel like this ambience, this presence, and if you cross the seal, then they start squawking. It's like this, you know, air raid siren almost kind of thing. And Sam sort of like holds up the light of Eärendil, and they kind of flinch away, and he's able to break through this sort of magic barrier into the tower. And you see him walk past these two statues in the film, like they're part of the decor, so it's good attention to detail. But apparently Peter Jackson did shoot a scene directly from the book of him breaking through and getting through. I would love to see that. And this is what I mean, there are so many deleted scenes, and I was hoping for this Ultimate Edition that was released on 4K, where they had everything packaged together, that they would finally go, here you go, and 20th anniversary.
Everything we ever shot for this film,
and they're not there. They didn't give any away, and I'm like, I know they exist. Stop trying to hide it from us. So I really hope one day, even if they don't integrate them into the actual film, they do upscale them, and they do get them out there so that we can see them. And then I'm sure some fantastic fan editor out there can clean the footage up and do a super extended edition of the film. But
12-hour Return of the King.
Yeah, I need it. I'm down for it. Let's do it. Let's get Beregond in there, and you know, Prince Imrahil and all those characters they cut out. But Gollum, I guess, like we talk about it's probably the pivotal stuff is the Mount Doom stuff right at the end. It's the stuff that always gets a tear out of me when I read the book. It's a scene that in the film always gives me absolute chills.
I also very quickly want to talk about. I love the bit with Sam and Frodo disguising themselves as orcs, because it's such a stupid thing.
The armor is worn by like no orcs wear that armor.
No orcs
whatever
ever worn. It's like he has like a kettle nose thing. Like like it's so dumb. I love it. And like they look so nothing like orcs. It's brilliant. I love the orcs just like. Yeah, right, whatever.
Yeah, and it's, you know, they don't even disguise their voices
I'm not paid
either.
enough to care about this.
You know, he's like, hit me, Sam, start fighting. He's like, no one pushes me, you filthy maggot. But he still sounds like Samwise Gamgee from like Somerset kind of farmer voice. It's brilliant. And the way they sneak out of that group is just really easy as well. They just kind
They
of
just
walk to the
walk off
side,
up a hill,
and no one
and
just
the rest of
looks.
Orcs just like, yeah, all right, whatever. I don't care.
I like the extended scenes here as well of Sam looking up and seeing the starlight through the clouds and the smog. That's one of my favorite parts. Beautifully written in the book as well by Tolkien. That I think he mentions that no matter how bleak things are, there was some untouched beauty beyond the realm, beyond the reach of Sauron out there, and it's wonderful. I'm not doing justice to the prose, damn it, but it's out. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, everything on Mount Doom, and as I said, like it felt like you were there on the journey with them on that climb. You know, you're willing them to destroy the ring. Even when you actually get into Mount Doom and Frodo stood there and he's just holding the ring, you've been there for 3-hour films. Everyone was on the edge of their seat going, just throw it in. I remember that night so vividly.
I love so much everyone's reaction to that film. Sam sums up everyone's reaction to that film without words. Just a look on his face, just like,
what are you waiting for?
Fuck's sake. We've walked for like a year. This has not been a good time, Frodo. Throw in the lava. Like, come on, man, please. And like, it's all just said for that one look. It's like that genuine, just like, oh, we failed.
Sam's like destroy it, and Frodo's
like,
no.
And then Gollum being the unlikely hero. And but there's that obviously I know you want to talk about this a little bit later, but I just want to talk about like when Gollum bites off his finger, the sound design there is too good.
Elijah Wood's scream as well. It's
all
brilliant.
of it is just I don't like that bit. It makes me feel genuinely squeamish. I'm just like, oh no, that's not good. Let's not do that. Yeah. So.
But right before that, I think we need to talk about Sam's crowning achievement in the film, right? That the scene to end all scenes.
Yeah.
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. And then Into the West starts playing.
It's so good. Oh, so
tears
good.
Every time. I'm getting misty now just thinking about it. It's wonderful.
It's just you. There is just no. It's just Sam in it. That's just Sam in a scene. He's just the greatest person of all time in all literature, of all fiction, all reality of all time. Just through and through, top bloke. Samwise Gamgee, honestly, like, and it's just so good. Every part of that, because obviously you get to see this exhaustion from Frodo all the way from Cirith Ungol and the marching, and you have this the back and forth, and you just see how genuinely exhausted he is. And then Sam's one last, and you know Sam's got to be close to that level of exhaustion as well, but he will just push through that last little section. And yeah, it's just perfect.
And then we get to the end, and again, this is kind of this is played up a bit more for the drama of the film, which I can absolutely understand. In the book, it makes sense though, because the book is this culmination of everything. It's not just the Lord of the Rings; it's the Silmarillion, it's all the tales of the First Age, all the way back to the creation, the Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings. It is just this massive, complete story that's all tied together. So I think in the book, isn't it like Gollum acquires the ring at the end, and he just starts dancing and jumping around, and then slips it. It's almost like an invisible force pushes him,
something like that,
gives him that final push. And obviously you read the book, it's like Eru Iluvatar, it's God, it's fate, it's predestiny, whatever you want to say it is, that was instrumental, that final nudge to destroy evil for good. It was all part of this grand plan, God's grand plan, essentially, from the Silmarillion. Whereas in the film, I think they tried multiple versions. They did edit a version where Gollum's just jumping around and falls in, but they said it felt really comedic and
felt like, oh, that's how they win. Gollum's clumsy. No, I get that.
Which wouldn't have worked visually. And then I think they tried a version where Frodo gets really angry and just bodily pushes Gollum in, which would have been very, very different. I
don't mind that one, to be fair. I think that would have been interesting.
And then they went with the one where both of them are in the same boat and fall over, and there's that tension there. There's that drama of Frodo hanging on, but I love the thematic nuance of that scene. In that, and I remember again in the cinema, the ring hits that lava. I'm like, why is it floating on a bed of like molten rock? Why is it not melting? Why is it not destroyed? The ring waits there, and it's almost like it's trying to claim one last victim. It wants to like draw one last person into the lava with it. And it's almost like it's waiting for that decision of Frodo as to whether to let go and plummet or whether to like actually be pulled out there. And it's waiting and waiting and waiting. And when Frodo finally grabs Sam's hand, that's when it, gives up. It no longer has that hold on. I mean, it has a hold on, it has an effect on Frodo, but it doesn't have that direct hold on him.
No.
And he's broken away from it. And when it's broken away,
Yeah,
Yeah.
you see that parallel obviously between Frodo and Gollum there. Like Gollum gleefully falling to his death because he's finally got the ring again. Everything
Hmm.
he's wanted is right there in his hand, and that's all he cares about. He doesn't care he's going to die because he's got the ring. That's what he cares about. And you get to see Frodo make the conscious decision then not to be like Frodo. All these sort of cautionary sort of ideas that Frodo had
Hmm.
in the previous films, this idea of trying to pull Gollum back from good, that was never the point of like. And I think Frodo comes to that conclusion of like he was never going to save Gollum, but through witnessing Gollum and what happened to him, he can save himself, and he can have that moment where he's like, "No, I want to live," and you have that beautiful moment with him and
Hmm.
Sam, and just yeah, I love that.
And then obviously that goes into all the endings that we talked about
Yeah,
with him not being able to come to terms with everything that happened, the wounds that he felt mentally and physically that he can't shake away
that
from,
will
and
never
it's
heal. Yeah,
yeah, and you know, you get. I've seen some people as well go like, "Oh, Frodo's being really selfish." You know, he went all after all your friends went for you, you're going to leave them, and you're just going to go. It's like you're missing the point entirely.
yeah.
Like he has seen things you people wouldn't believe, to bring a
He
flavor of
has
quote in
felt
there.
pressures that no mortal being has ever been able to resist for such a long time. No one but Frodo could have like carried the ring
Hmm.
to Mordor. And I think that's always something that people like miss out on. Like, yeah, obviously you get to see how good Sam is, and I stand by he is the best of us. But I don't think Sam would have been able to get all the way there without
No.
being corrupted. I don't think anyone could, because that's the point. The point is that only Frodo could have done this. Only hobbits specifically, but specifically only
Hmm.
Frodo. And
He had to be the beast of burden, didn't he? He
yeah,
was like almost like a Christ-like figure, I guess, kind of like bearing
yeah,
the cross almost to sort of like its destination ultimately. Um, Yeah, it's wow. No, I don't even. There's so much to talk about. I mean, we're past 2 hours now, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of this
yeah.
film, in all honesty, and everything going on with the narrative. I guess we could talk about music as well, because you know, it's incredible. As I say, like I think Howard Shore essentially produced almost 3 operas for each of these, and you know, one complete tells the story of the Lord of the Rings just through the music as well,
Oh yeah.
and it's another phenomenal score. The Gondor theme in full statement, which I think you can hear elements of and little bits and pieces of in some of the other films, but you know, it really comes into its own in this one. The lighting of the beacon sequence as
Oh
well,
yeah.
where that kicks in, is just fantastic. Ride of the Rohirrim. It's a lot of these
Yeah,
themes we've heard before, but they're like ramped up. They're, you know,
you get to
they're
see
bolstered.
like you say, it's almost like we've been teased like aspects of it, but you finally get to see what it's been leading towards. Like this film in every aspect, I think, is the culmination of the journey, and that's the
Yeah.
same for this musical journey that we've been on as well. You get to see the full soundtrack, I suppose. You get to see what
Hmm.
it's all been leading up to. You get to see the full Gondorian theme, the full Rohirrim theme, the Eagle theme, and the Shire theme, the Lord of the Rings themes, like the
Hmm.
Fellowship themes, and all of that just comes to a head. And you get to see this just absolutely just blasting your eardrums, like it's
Hmm.
yeah,
I think one of my
it's hard to
favorite bits
overstate.
of new music is actually in the extended edition. It's the Houses of Healing, and it's
Yeah,
Liv
that's
Tyler
nice.
singing. And I think originally that song was meant to be used for something in Two Towers, like a love theme or something that was going to
Yeah,
be between the two. For the longest time, I didn't know that was Liv Tyler. I mean, they probably, I'm pretty much sure they mentioned that in the special features, but for whatever reason, I blanked that detail out of my mind. So when I was reading the comment again, someone said it's Liv Tyler. There is a more extended version of that song that you can find. I think it was on a Lord of the Rings Symphony soundtrack, I think it is, or unused, unreleased tracks or something like that. But there's a slightly longer version, which makes me think again, was there more that they was in like
yeah.
an alternate cut of the film, maybe? I also love the theme. Oh God, I've forgotten what it's called in the theatrical soundtrack, but it's right after where Frodo goes, "The ring is mine," and then this choral piece kicks in,
Yeah, this
and it's
dark
this
sort
doom,
of
and the
yeah,
drums like boom, 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 boom. It's like, oh my God, it's like Armageddon's finally here. You know,
yeah.
the apocalypse has reached. I love Sauron's reaction in that moment, sort of breaking away from the music, going to like another scene. It's
Yeah.
when Frodo puts the ring on,
And
and
Sauron just
there's
immediately turns the eyes
he's
like
like, it's like Darth Vader in New Hope. It's like, what? Like it just, it's like
yeah.
the eye says so much emotionally, and it's
He
just
feels
like,
so panic. You can see the panic,
yeah,
like
he does like a double take, doesn't he?
yeah,
So
it's
I
great.
love that stuff. But yeah, the soundtrack's one, and then Into the West, beautiful song,
Yeah.
fantastic song to end it on. And again, a recent discovery, probably in like the last year or two. Annie Lennox actually recorded an alternate song for the end credits, which was fully recorded. You can find it on YouTube. I think it's a beautiful song. It's called "Use Well the Days," and all of the
Also, I've
lyrics in
heard
the
it.
song are direct quotes from Tolkien lyrics. Um, I think, oh God, what are the lyrics in there? Around the corner, there may wait a new road or a secret gate or something. And a lot of them are taken from various poems and songs and just direct descriptors from Tolkien's own writings in the Lord of the Rings book. It's a beautiful song. I think it would have worked well, but you can't beat Into the West. It's the
No, I
perfect
mean,
song to end it on.
yeah.
And I think the detail of ending with the pencil sketches of the characters as well is just such a brilliant touch to it as well, which obviously they replicated with Hobbit
Yeah.
films in Battle of the Five Armies as well. But it's one of the most fulfilling endings to a film, to a story,
Oh, yeah.
obviously bringing in the book to it as well, that I've ever seen. And when you watch them either individually or if you do watch them as a whole, as a
Which you should.
marathon, it's so fulfilling. It's
Yeah.
everything you want a finale to be. It ties everything up, and it's just so emotionally enriching. Like there's different things to glean from each of the Lord of the Rings films.
Oh,
I
yeah.
say, like, my favorite standalone film to watch is Fellowship of the Ring. You get that emotional resonance at the end. Two Towers, I would say, is probably the most action-packed one and the
Yeah.
one that's more thrilling to watch and engaging to watch. And Return of the King is just sort of your emotional wrap up to everything,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is exactly what it needs to be as the closing of a trilogy, really.
I mean, I think that's the reason why the Return of the King is the one that got all the laud. It's because it is the resolution. Like, it's hard to view the other ones in a vacuum. It's hard to view any of them in a vacuum because,
Mm-hmm.
like you say, it's very much a trilogy. It can't exist in a vacuum. It can't exist by itself. And the Return of the King does such a fantastic job of just wrapping all that up, just ties everything together. And yeah, it's just and the music does a great way of doing that. Sorry, excuse me. I really want to touch on the Shire music as well, which I love that
Mm-hmm.
it sort of plays throughout the one of several endings. I've just like because it's a music we haven't heard in a long time, if memory serves. It's something, especially not in like focus in the way that it is there. Because in that scene, like you say, obviously in the pub when they're having the drinks and everything, there's no real dialogue. There's a bit of ambient noise, but the predominant focus is just this music. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's such a nice way of sort of reaffirming this sense of home, the sense of safety that it is all over, and and that's okay. And sort of
Mm-hmm.
like that idea of peace, which I don't think there's any music that makes me feel like home more than the Shire music, more than things like Concerning Hobbits in the first film. And like, I think I've always attributed that to the first film because of the way that it sets up the music and the way it sets up the Shire. But I think part of that is also because of the way it's used in the ending, because it gives you that sense of safety and completion and just warmth that I
Mm-hmm.
think and depth that I don't think you get from lots of pieces of music, just because without dialogue you know that it's over. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something that the music itself just speaks to something within a person and just makes them feel that sense of safety and of home. And so I love that sort of plays throughout the
Mm-hmm.
ending there as well.
Yeah, and even when it plays at the end, there's like a underlying sense of melancholy to it. I
Yeah,
know it plays in full at Sam's wedding, and that's when it's meant to, but then it kind of tails off and it becomes a little bit more introspective, which
yeah,
obviously links with Frodo's character at the time. So again, just Howard Shore's an absolute genius, and he's done a lot of great scores that have worked for the films, but this is his magnum opus as far as
oh
I'm
yeah,
concerned.
absolutely.
Of any composer, really, I don't think a score will ever come this close. Obviously, there's great scores, Star Wars, whatnot.
Yeah, you got
It's
John
difficult to
Williams
compare
producing
music
things.
because a lot of it's orchestrated and exactly
Yeah,
for what the film needs to be. But in terms of just the depth and the
no, I
complexity of
mean,
this score alone, and the different, as we mentioned, the different races it has to relate to, and the different emotions that it
yeah.
has to get across, it's just
I mean,
outstanding.
like I love soundtracks to films and games. It's like one of the things I listen to the most,
Hmm.
and I think the one that I will forever come back to is the Lord of the Rings ones because I just think it tells a story so succinct. Like you say, like I can listen to the music and I can tell you what scene's happening, what line of dialogue is being spoken half the time, because you can just feel that narrative flow present even throughout the entirety of the music and the way that it's orchestrated really does tell that story. And obviously, you have the greats like John Williams in basically everything that he does, and he's definitely up there. But like in one standalone, isolated thing, I don't think you can beat Howard Shore with the Lord of the Rings trilogy because it's perfect. There
Hmm.
is no criticism I could level at all against any part of it. There is no one I think could have done it better. It's just a masterpiece, really.
Yeah, and I think talking about Howard Shore, I think one of the things that I'm most looking forward to about the Amazon show is that he is coming back to do the
Yeah.
music. It's going to be a collaboration. I think I was just having to search the name. Bear McCreary, who did the God of War soundtrack, he's done a number of soundtracks, but the soundtrack to God of War was amazing. The
Oh
new
yeah.
one that came out on PS4. So
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to seeing how those two work with each other. And I think Howard Shore's going to bring that familiar element. So even if the show's an absolute dumpster fire, even if
She
it's
has some
absolute
great
hot garbage,
music.
we know that the music's going to be fantastic. At least and it's going to feel at home with Middle Earth. So
That's
I
it.
guess swings and roundabouts with it. Um, but I guess in terms of best scenes and greatest moments, I think we've talked about a
I
lot of
think
them. I don't
yeah,
know if you've got any others
there's
that
very
jump out to you.
few left. Obviously the big ones for me obviously is the lighting of the beacons. I think is one we haven't really touched on that much, but I love just like seeing that the landscape of New Zealand yet again, and be a character almost of itself. You'd see the sort of like the fire spread. I think it's such a fantastic sequence. The Charge of the Rohirrim, obviously, Edge of Night, obviously. Um,
We're going to have all
all
the
of the
same moments, aren't we?
yeah,
I've got nothing
all
to add to all these moments so far. I
all of the
concur.
endings, they're all pretty brilliant.
Uh-huh.
I enjoy the bit in Rivendell when Legolas nods to Frodo because they never actually share a line of dialogue in the films together. Um, that's it. He's like, "Hey, elf guy I met once, how's it going, man?" I like that. That was pretty good.
I will say, thanks to memes, that laughing scene at the end where Frodo wakes up in the bed has been ruined
Yeah,
for me for all
I
time.
know exactly the video you're talking about, and I love it so much. It's so good.
It's like Gimli when he shows up as well.
Yeah, it's
It's
so
fine.
good.
It's like a curtain call, isn't it, for all the
Yeah,
Fellowship
no,
to look
and
about
it's
very much.
brilliant.
You
Yeah,
want to
I
sort
love
of
it.
like applaud, and they take their bow, and
Yeah,
that's what it
exactly.
feels like. And I think it's justified having 3 films with an ensemble cast
Oh,
like this
absolutely, and
of
it's nice to
characters that
see
you
that
love.
final,
Yeah.
yeah, that goodbye almost.
So I guess this sort of brings us on to the sort of like ending off with like the impact of not only this film but the trilogy as a whole. I mean, this was absolutely just huge critical acclaim,
Oh yeah,
critical and
it is to
commercial
this day
acclaim.
the most successful film of all time at the Oscars. Well,
Yeah,
so the most successful perfect run at the Oscars, I think, because it won every category it was nominated in with
all 11.
11.
Yeah,
That's it, not 13. 11 Oscars. Which I believe
broke
is
even with Ben-Hur and Titanic, I believe, didn't it?
yes, but Ben-Hur
Yeah.
and Titanic were nominated for more and didn't win them.
Ah,
So
okay.
it's the
Yeah.
most successful in the fact that it won everything it tried. It did the best at everything it tried to do.
And I remember watching the Oscars that year as well, because I used to watch the Oscars back then. I think this might have been one of the first years that I ever like tuned in for it with these films. But bated breath, wanting Lord of the Rings to win everything. And I'll
Yeah,
never
and it
forget at
did.
the end with Spielberg when he stood up on stage and said, "It's a clean sweep, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King." And
Yeah.
it felt like I think that all the previous 2 films, Fellowship and Two Towers, were deserving of all those
Oh
categories as
yeah,
well, Best Picture and everything of that year. But it felt like they were like,
they were
wait,
saving it.
hold,
Yeah.
hold, Return of the King comes out. Okay, now just give them
Yeah,
everything. Like, this
loose.
is
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, no.
But it's a tremendous achievement in filmmaking. It's one of the most influential films I think
Oh
ever
yeah.
made, influential trilogies, and continues to be. The fan base is still there. That love of Tolkien,
I mean,
and
the
I
fact that me
think
and
it
you
just
have had now a 6 hour long series on discussing these films 20 years after they came out, I think says a lot about
yeah.
its staying power.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it will continue to do so. I think as new people discover these films, I think I've seen a lot of reaction channels probably just say, "Oh, first time watching the Lord of the Rings." They've probably seen it before.
Yeah.
They're just doing it for clicks, but there are some genuine ones out there, and it's amazing to see people come into it with new eyes. And I love videos like that because it almost feels like you're watching them again for the first time. I think that's
Mhm.
probably why they get so many millions of
Yeah,
views. Those
obviously, yeah.
reaction videos, they know what they're doing, but it will continue to have a reach because I mean the story is
Timeless.
everlasting, really.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
timeless, yeah.
absolutely is. From The Hobbit, or if you want to read into it, The Silmarillion, especially The Lord of the Rings. Is it like the second? It probably isn't now. There's probably been more books. I know for a long time it was the second best-selling book next to the Bible, wasn't
Bible,
it? I think,
yeah. Mhm.
and quite rightly so.
I don't know, but I'm sure it's up there.
Yeah,
I'll have a search.
it's just the greatest stories ever told. As far as I'm concerned, I don't. I mentioned this in the Fellowship review. I don't know I wouldn't want to live in a world where Lord of the Rings or Tolkien didn't
No,
exist.
I
It's
completely agree.
wonderful. It's escapism at its absolute best. There
I
isn't
mean,
a single mythology that comes close in terms of fictional fantasy works. There's some great ones, the world of Westeros or The Witcher, or all the ones that you come to imagine. But this is the one that sort of kickstarted the
yeah,
modern fantasy trend, very much so, isn't it?
I mean, I am probably the biggest fantasy nerd you will ever speak to in your entire life, Chris.
Mhm.
I've read the works of Robert Jordan, the works of
Oh
Brandon
wow.
Sanderson, and all the rest of them. I've done them all, but like they they wouldn't exist without Tolkien, and that's just a simple fact of it. Fantasy as we know it is fundamentally defined by the archetypes that we've seen in the Lord of the Rings. I regularly play Dungeons and Dragons, and like the entire basis of all of that entire game is on Tolkien-esque mythology. Like before Tolkien, elves were not these tall, athletic warriors; they were creepy little dudes that worked for Santa Claus. Like we have that he has fundamentally changed what we know to think about these races. Dwarves and hobbits, or halflings as they're generally referred to in other media, because hobbits is a trademark term. Um, but like all of these fantasy races that we are so like, massive nerds like myself are so intimately familiar with now is entirely stemmed from the genius of Tolkien, and I think especially from the works of Peter Jackson, because I think while obviously Lord of the Rings has and always will be one of the most highly regarded novels of all time, it definitely didn't have mainstream appeal until these films. Like you talk about the 1980s or 1970s animated film,
The
um
1970s, yeah, 78, yeah.
1970s, yeah. And like while great in its own way, it certainly didn't have like nearly the sort of mass appeal that Lord of the Rings does today. You can talk to anyone and they will know Lord of the Rings. They'll know "You shall not pass," and they'll know who Gandalf is, and they might know the name of Frodo or Sauron or Aragorn. But I think it's hard to think of any other media that has that degree of just cultural I don't know, cultural personification. The idea that it is almost so pervasive in our culture that it's become its own entity itself. I think Star Wars is probably the only other, or Harry
Mhm.
Potter maybe the only other equivalent things that can even stand close to the same pedestal of the Lord of the Rings. And for me, I do believe the films are a big part of that. I know certainly that as big a fan as I am of fantasy, um, that would not nearly be the case without these films, because there is no way a 9-year-old is going to sit down and read the works of Tolkien. But a 9-year-old will definitely happily sit down and watch 12 hours of Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's the impact of this personally and on a much larger sort of scale, it is so profound that it's hard to really put that into words, because it has inspired generations and generations of fans and creators that have been so directly inspired by these works that they are so crucial and fundamental that without these works, I do, as ridiculous a statement as it sounds, I do genuinely think the world would be a very different place without them.
Mhm.
And I don't think there are many series or films or books or whatever that can have that same claim.
Yeah. Oh my god. I was like, no, continue, continue. This is good stuff. I think just in terms of film as well, like I mentioned this with Fellowship, I think, but fantasy films at that point, fantasy
Nothing.
filmmaking, it was like a dead genre, really. You might get some like direct to DVD, direct to video things, or films that weren't really that big that might have like a cult following, but never to this level. And a blockbuster film nonetheless as
Oh yeah,
well. That's because that's basically what these films are. They're incredibly well made, people passionate behind it, but they are very much blockbuster sort of like
yeah.
action films in many ways, action adventure films. And for the Academy to notice that and to give it all these accolades, and I know that Oscars don't mean everything, but it was a wonderful gesture, I thought, at the end, where it was like, we appreciate everything, and
Oh
it
yeah.
really is everything. You watch those special features, costume department, art department, just everything, set construction, actors. It's one of the most wonderfully visually realized worlds. And now I think just like the impact of these films, it almost feels like the heights have been achieved. You think of the Shire, you think of that landscape. Like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine a different artistic interpretation of
No.
the Shire, because they nailed it. The music, I can't think of another piece of music that could symbolize the Shire. You know, it's just everything. You think of Orthanc, you think of what the weapons look like, what the armor looks like. They've captured it so perfectly. You know, I don't envy anyone else that ever takes another, you know, swing at an adaptation of the Lord of the Rings, because it is always going to be held up to this. And not only this, but I think that the Amazon show that is, you know, telling stories from a different age, from the Second Age, everyone's still going to be looking to this. This is still the same thing, you know. And for better or worse, people were doing the same with the Hobbit films, were all, you know, lording it up to the Lord of the Rings, which you know, you could argue is one of the reasons that that trilogy failed in many ways. But it's just, yeah, I'm lost for words, in all honesty. It's like,
it's an
shall I
impossible
compare
bar,
thee
isn't
to a
it?
summer's day almost when
Yeah.
it comes to Lord of the Rings? It's, yeah, it's just, maybe I should
It
write a
is
sonnet
just
for
an
it or
impossible
something.
bar. It's asking. It's like asking a blind man to describe the sun. Like
Yeah.
it's such an impossible task that to really sum up how important these films are and the impact they've had. Because it is. I genuinely believe that it is immeasurable. Like I don't think there are many other films. Again, Star Wars probably is the only one to me that I think has the same degree of cultural impact that this film has had for the sci-fi genre.
Yeah.
And like, and we've all seen how attempts to sort of continue that story has gone. So I do certainly hope that the Lord of the Rings stays as perfect as it is, and I really do think it is perfect. Like you say, like everything about these films and everything we've talked about, the few minor little problems that we've had with it have been massively overshadowed by the massive praise and laudits that we've just laid upon this film, because it is it's such a marvel, honestly, to me, that it is such a well constructed film from start to finish. There are so few flaws, because even if honestly, if you made, let's say, half of Two Towers be terrible, like whatever, like I don't know, you make the wargs talk or something,
That's in the
then
book.
like, well, yeah. But like, yeah, let's say you do some ridiculous things that just don't translate to
Yeah.
film. Even if you were to ruin most of the Two Towers, this would probably still be my favorite trilogy of all time. You know what I mean? Because there is already so much perfection laid out across the film that even if you were to ruin huge chunks of it, I still think it'd stand up and like this test of time. And it's just such a special franchise that I don't think I just can't see anything ever reaching this degree of just being this good ever again. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. There are some things are only special because they are so unique, and they are so legendary. And I
It's
think it's
lightning in a
fine.
bottle, as we said, right?
Yeah,
You will never see films like this
no
again. With the current studio systems, it was the right place, the right time, the
time.
right idea.
Yeah,
It was just
it is
everything.
just
Yeah.
yeah. Again, it's miraculous that it was able to be created in the first place, and then it was created as well as it was. The only modern thing I can think of being close to it, hopefully in the next few years, I'll be saying, is the Dune franchise, because again, it's another one of those labors of love. Even then, already, I don't think the first film holds up nearly as well as Fellowship did,
No,
and
I agree with that.
there are so many of these points that like I don't think labors of love like this can exist anymore. Not in the way that they did back then. Nobody is willing to take that gamble. To use Dune as the example, they should have done is the exact same thing as the Lord of the Rings and just filmed all three of
Back to
the
back.
main Dune books back to back and done it
Well,
sequentially.
that's the studio not having
Yeah,
the balls to, like, you know, support it.
exactly. Yeah,
Whereas back, you know, Lord of the Rings nowadays, you'd probably have the same thing. Well, we'll see
absolutely.
how
Yeah,
Fellowship does first, and if it takes, then we'll consider the other one. The fact that
exactly.
all, you know, when you watch these films, I'm actually absolutely speechless at all three. And the fact that they were all filmed at the same time, I can't. Can you imagine, like, the
No,
absolute Goliath of a task that is, and the fact that all
especially the
three of
fact they
them come
have
out as
so
good as they
little
are?
time to then reflect upon feedback. The fact that
Yeah,
they've had this first film out, and it's like, okay, cool. Glad they liked it, because if they didn't, they've got two more coming anyway.
yeah.
Like it is a case that like, and they were able to just set that trend, and obviously things could be edited, and things definitely were edited, but like they was able to set that path right from day one and follow it to completion, and it just hit like the bullseye. It was just perfect.
It's all about a gamble. You know, you look at the best films of all time and the best franchises of all time. They all started with a, you know, yeah, we're going to take a chance on this franchise,
Yeah,
and they're some of the most enduring franchises of all time now. And you look at franchises nowadays, and it's there's a
not the
lack of
same.
identity almost with franchises now, because so much of it is just, oh well, let's make the next sequel to that thing that came out 30 years ago, as opposed to sort of, you know, proposing something new. See, when you were talking about things being filmed back to back, a labor of love, I thought you were going to go Avatar 2, 3, 4, 5, and Christ knows how many, because we're still waiting on those, but those are also being filmed back to back, almost like the Lord of the Rings films
true.
are. But
I mean, again, like, I mean, crucify if you want. Avatar is a bad film, so I'm not really that excited.
No, I
about
agree.
those
I
ones.
agree. I agree.
So like, but I agree that, like, but again, that's another one of these directing greats now being able to just put through their vision and just being told, okay, we trust you. Let's see where that leads, and hopefully with the Avatar 2 through 7 or whatever they're going to do, hopefully they're good, and they will have that vision of James Cameron in the same way that these were the vision of Peter Jackson. But I think it's hard to visualize something like that ever really occurring again. I think this really was a once in a lifetime moment, and I am so very glad that I was alive to alive at the same period as it. I wish I'd been alive maybe 2 years earlier, so I could have gone to see them in the cinemas as well. But here we are.
Any chance that I get, you know, if they put these in the cinemas, I'm always going to be there. The extended editions, mind you, I don't know if I'd go for the theatrical versions. But yeah, I was really hoping they'd put them in the cinemas for the 20th anniversary, but they didn't. So I guess maybe got to wait 5 more years, perhaps to the 25th anniversary, which is when Peter Jackson talked about the deleted scenes. He said maybe in like a special 25th anniversary. So 5 more years, watch this space.
5 more years, Chris. That's it. Count down the days.
We're going to get that super extended edition. Oh, I will. I will. Believe me. I'll count them down. But yeah, I guess unfortunately we've got to have to come to the end of our Lord of the Rings discussion for now. You know, I'm sure we'll talk more about Lord of the Rings in the future. It seems an impossibility not to, in all honesty. But we want to hear from you guys now. We've talked 2.5 hours on this film, and as I said, we've barely scratched the surface on it. I'm sure. So let us hear from you guys. Let us know what you think of the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy as a whole, the impact that it's had on your life and the works of Tolkien, everything like that. We love talking Lord of the Rings, and it'll be an absolute pleasure to reply to you guys' comments. So be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And, you know, we kind of took a slight deviation, I guess, from the Peter Jackson retrospective that we were doing weekly. You know, we went through all of them. Bad Taste, Meet the Feebles, Brain Dead, Heavenly Creatures, The Frighteners. Then we kind of devoted an entire month to the Lord of the Rings and went off on a bit of a Tolkien tangent. We are going to cycle it back, though, and we're going to finish strong with the the 2 other feature films that he had come out. So on January the 6th, which is the Thursday, we're going to get back into the swing of things. We're talking about the 2005 King Kong film. All 3 however long it goes on for. We're talking about the extended edition as well, specifically. So that's going to be a fun discussion. Hopefully we might have a collaboration on that one. It's going to be me and Tate again, and it might be a third person on there as well. We'll see. But that is a film that I haven't watched beginning to end in many, many years, especially the extended edition. So that's going to be hopefully a trip to revisit. And then, of course, after that, it will be the Lovely Bones, and that will conclude our Peter Jackson retrospective. But yeah, socials. Yeah, if you want to find more information on that, they're right here. It's like really emotional that I'm having to wrap up the Lord of the Rings discussion. Twitter at cinema_savvy, and you can find us on Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy as well. Harry, this has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. We always kind of alluded to talking about Lord of the Rings. We'd get it in drips and drabs, but we finally had it out across 3 videos.
Yeah, honestly, it's been 7 hours well spent, I think, Chris.
Absolutely,
so it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for having me on the channel. It's been
it's brilliant.
It's been
I love how it's worked out as well. Like, I couldn't think of like a more perfect person that I could have had on to talk about the Lord of the Rings films on. So again, thank you for devoting all those hours of time to it.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to just rant about Lord of the Rings. I don't get to do it nearly as often as I should.
It's what we do best, right? It's what we do best. It's why we love what we do. But yeah, so to everyone else that's been watching these reviews, that's gone back and watched the Lord of the Rings or talked about Lord of the Rings with us, we bid you all a very fond farewell. Till next time.
Bye-bye.